Okay, what's going on, everybody? Thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to the Zach Costello Show. Do me a favor, guys, on your way in, make sure that if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, if you could hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed. It's a very easy way to support this channel and this mission. If you are a bad goy, as we like to say, hit that like button. I know that all of you were discussing yesterday in the chat what the name of the chat should be, what the name of the community should be. And I was told that the Zach Pack, or in short, Z Pack, was one of the winners. But do you guys know what Z Pack actually is? I understand what we're trying to do here. A Pack versus Z Pack. Guys, Z Pack is a 5-day prescription antibiotic regimen used to treat bacterial infections like bronchitis, pneumonia, and strep throat. So I don't think Z-Pack is going to be the name of our chat here. All right. Okay. Look, I am excited for today's show. I am going to have on, well, I'm having on, he's actually here. I'm going to bring him up here in a second. Former FBI agent and whistleblower, Kyle Seraphin. He is joining us today to talk about the current fire that the FBI is under, specifically for the alleged cover-up or mistakes in two very important and current investigations: the DC pipe bomber and the Charlie Kirk case, as it relates to a lot of what Joe Kent is talking about regarding foreign leads and the not looking into them by the FBI. These are two issues that Kyle has had his nose in and he has specific experience within. So it'll be very interesting to get his perspective on both of these issues. The former FBI deputy director and now self-proclaimed podfather, Dan Bongino, played a large role in finding the alleged suspect, or Patsy, as many people are referring to him as, Brian Cole Jr., in this pipe bomber case. And he called it his proudest moment at the FBI. I know Kyle has some receipts and experience and a take on that topic that you're going to want to hear. Dan Bongino is also on record attacking Joe Kent over his statements regarding any foreign involvement in the Charlie Kirk assassination case. And Kyle, like I said, also has information on that you're going to want to hear. If you guys have any questions or comments for us, we'll get to super chats at the end of today's show. Kyle can remain on for as long as he would like. Before we get started, though, the Wellness Company is today's sponsor, and their Smile toothpaste is something that you all need in your life. Let me play this, and then we will get to the show. I'm Zach Costello. Okay, you guys, say bye-bye to receding gums. Gum recession is not just cosmetic. Millions of people deal with bleeding gums, tooth sensitivity, and even tooth loss. Once gums start pulling back, most toothpaste do absolutely nothing to help. Meet Smile, the Wellness Company's next-generation toothpaste designed to support gum repair, strengthen teeth, reduce sensitivity, and gently whiten your smile. Smile is powered by healing peptides like BPC-157, known for helping reduce inflammation and supporting the repair of gum and bone tissue. The formula uses advanced aquasome technology, a mini liposomal shield that protects these peptides and delivers them directly to damaged gum tissue. It also uses GHK-Cu peptide to support collagen and healthier gum structure, probiotics to balance the oral microbiome, and PAP whitening that removes stains without harsh peroxide. The results are stronger gums, healthier teeth, and a brighter smile. Head to twc.health/Zach and use code ZACH to get 10% off on every order. Okay, for those of you guys that don't know, TWC, the wellness company, they were attacked last month for refusing to remove themselves as a sponsor from Candace Owens' show. They were getting pressure from Candace's opponents, trying to get them to pull from her, and they stood strong. They said, no, we're not going to engage in that. We believe in what we're doing. We believe in the audience, and they said no. So that's good on them. And I appreciate them as a company. I'm happy to have them as a sponsor. That Smile toothpaste is good stuff. Use the code and get yourself some. Okay. I want to bring in Kyle Seraphin here, and we can get started. Kyle, thank you for joining us today on the Zach Costello Show. And for those who might not have seen your stuff or who don't follow you, introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of your background and what you have your nose in these days.
Sure. Well, I'm a husband. I'm a father in that order. I'm an American citizen. I'm an Air Force veteran, and I was formerly with the FBI for 6 years. And then I went on unpaid suspension for I think about 14 or 15 months. That was during the Biden era. I was a COVID vaccine refuser. And additionally, I was a whistleblower that brought out a bunch of information. I actually started my whistleblowing very early on. But the stuff that people heard about that went to Congress was that I showed people that the FBI was investigating parents at school board meetings, and they were using counterterrorism tools to do it. I made some disclosures about FISA 702, so the surveillance state. I was actually a party to Dan Bongino and Dinesh D'Souza's movie called Police State. I actually scripted almost all the interactions between sort of the reenactions of FBI agents talking and so on, because I wanted it to be realistic. I did all the staging, and I'm actually in the movie in quite a few ways wearing a mask because I didn't want my face in it, but we did a lot of the arrest that was from that movie. So people saw that. They saw me. Yeah, I'm kind of an all-around hater of government, generally speaking, but definitely government corruption more specifically. I think the answer is when in doubt, we could probably get rid of it. And that turns out to be the case for almost all the intelligence stuff that we do domestically. I am a huge proponent of sort of individual responsibility, and that means I don't need government to tell me how to do stuff. So that's my general perspective. I also want to say that the idea of being the Zach pack and the azithromycin for 5 days, that's not a terrible thing. I mean, bacterial infections are terrible. I run a podcast now because I didn't really have another option. So I run a podcast as well, and I do it in the mornings. We don't compete with your time slot. And I call my people the watch list because watching me can get you in some real trouble. And we've had all kinds of shady things. The most recent thing was the last time I had Steve Baker, and we're going to be talking about some of his reporting regarding the pipe bomb case. We had him on Friday's show. And on Friday, just after I finished my live stream, somebody went to the New Mexico Department of Justice and filed a complaint, allegedly as me, saying that my wife had a cocaine problem, which is patently absurd. But I don't live in New Mexico anymore. So New Mexico closed out the investigation. And then I called them on it yesterday when they said they closed it. And I found out that the complaint said, "My name is Kyle Seraphin. I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'd like to report my wife Emily's cocaine problem. Please look into her." And so once you end up in sort of this space and you start asking some of these questions, you find yourself kind of attacked. And I've been attacked by better and worse people. I have a lot of empathy for Joe Kent right now, seeing Dan Bongino come after him, because Dan touted my story, and then Dan subsequently disowned me. And now watching him do it to Joe Kent, it irritates me in a big way.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. And I guess the first thing that I'll say is regarding the Zach pack or the Z pack. I mean, I feel like what's interesting about that is maybe if we are the antibiotic that kills the infections, then maybe that's not a bad thing.
It's right, not guys, a bad thing.
Growing on me. It's growing on me. But okay.
Yeah, and you know what? It could kill the thing that's growing on you theoretically. Is it?
There you go. There you go. But yeah, no. That's why. I mean, we call ourselves, or at least I've started to call ourselves, the bad guys, because we talk about things that might get us in trouble, or maybe even cause the channel to not grow as fast as it should. But we don't have to get into any of that. But as far as the censorship item goes, that is an extremely important issue for me. And that was probably one of my biggest driving forces, especially in the last election, and why I advocated so hard for this Trump administration, because what I saw as a major threat from the left was the censorship issue and their censorship of conservatives. Now what I'm starting to see, and what highly concerns me, is that it seems like there is a portion of the right that's actually moving about getting involved in this censorship issue. And that's kind of what that's what I have been sounding the alarm about very often here on my channel. But yeah, that censorship issue is certainly one that is concerning to me. So it's interesting. I didn't know that what kind of got you involved in this initial whistleblowing was that censorship issue.
Well, here's the thing. Everyone likes to think that the left has some sort of monopoly on cancel culture, and that they're uniquely, doing something horrible. The fact is, at this point, if you look at it and you're an honest operator, I'm politically independent. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm actually to the right of all of them by a lot. Like I go to church and my wife wears a veil and I have children and we're homeschooling them. And so, that's where my brain is at. I own more guns than most people have friends.
With this community for
sure.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, like I love when somebody's like, you're a libtard. It's like, really? You don't want to come to my house at any time. I'm always armed. I drive a diesel truck. I don't care about any of the things that you think I would. And I actually told this is kind of a wild moment, but I was in New Mexico and they were like, how come you don't put your kids in school? And I was like, well, on the outside chance that some radical loser leftist person wants to go and explain some strange things to my 6-year-old about gender ideology. Yeah. I don't want to have to skin a human being and leave them to be eaten by coyotes in the desert. And that would be bad for them. It'd be bad for my soul. It would be bad for my kids to explain to them later, like why we were on the run, why we lived in the swamp in Louisiana. So like that's how far to the right I live. We're willing to do all the things to avoid it. But the left does not have a monopoly on this. It's not just cancel culture. It's tribalism. Yeah. We're in such a tribal time right now. And Zach, I'm old enough to remember when we had friends that didn't agree with us and we didn't take that as a personal affront to our core being. Yeah. That most of my best friends didn't agree on a lot of things growing up, that it was very common for us to not have that. Before the internet, before the instantaneous snap judgment, we used to actually have friends that would say really wild, stupid things. And you'd be like, yeah, that's my friend that thinks this thing. I had friends who were in a cult when I was in college. They legitimately like sat around with a candle and stared at it and tried to mark every time they had a thought. And I would go screw with them by dropping a fork into the garbage disposal and turning on to make a bunch of noises. So they would have a bunch of thoughts about how mad they were at me. Like, they had a pentagram on the wall in their bedroom and it was like, that's bizarre. We got along great. And I would tell people, I have friends. They're in a cult. We live together. They're really nice people in a cult. And then they'd meet them and they go, yeah, they're really nice. I go, yeah. I mean, they're nuts, but they're nice.
Yeah. No, I mean, just being able to engage in conversation and just, not judge someone or consider them evil just because they have a different thought than you or because they have a different perspective than you is just, and that's the time that we live in. And you're 100% right. It's tribalism. It's identity politics that's gotten into this trouble that we're in right now. Absolutely. And it leads to cancel culture regardless of what side it's on. And that is extremely dangerous. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to it for me, like, I consider I'm a free speech absolutist, but I actually consider free speech to be actually a very Christian issue. I believe that, obviously Jesus is the Messiah and I'm a Christian and my Christian faith inspires me to believe that Jesus is the Logos and the Word of God. And that comes from the ancient Greek, which basically means language or speech. And that is a central principle, which I think individuals and nations must protect that. And if it's not protected, I mean, who tries to historically shut down free speech? That's tyrants, dictators. And you're not the good guy if you're on the side of censorship. Never. And again, you can go to John's gospel and look at the beginning, right? In the beginning, there was the word. That's it. And it's very simple. It's very simple for that. And you're 100% right. The tell that you were on the wrong side of history is if you are the one that's trying to censor speech. I have a really funny meme right now, and it's got a guy wearing the MAGA hat, and he's like, are we the baddies now? It actually says something a little bit more colorful and a little bit more homophobic, but I won't grace your channel with that. But it's worth asking if you're the person that wants to shut down people because you can't hear their words. I mean, I thought that was the other team. I mean, it's not my team for sure. Yeah. I want to have more words. If you say dumb things, I'm more than happy to, like, that's really easy to argue against. Yeah. If you've got bad ideas, if you've got bigoted ideas that are not based in reality, it doesn't matter what those things are. Right. And if there's some stereotypes that actually hold water, there's a reason why. So we should discuss those. If you try to hide them, then they fester and they grow into things and they become some, devolved, ugly version. So I like watching people allegedly on the right. I don't think they're actually conservative, but they claim to be on the right. Watching these people want to shut down a conversation. You won't hear me do that. I'll tell you that I don't find it interesting, and I'll tell you that I don't find it valuable. Right. I may not want to participate in it, but it's not because I think that you're not allowed to have it. It's just not, you're going to have to do it without me because I'm not there for it. That kind of thing. Right. Yeah. It's like we have the right to be wrong and we have the right to have bad ideas, and they should all be put out there. And the best way to shed light on bad ideas or things that are not valuable or things that are not true is to have them out there and to shed light on them, not to suppress them. It's actually when you start to suppress bad ideas, when you start to suppress evil, that's when it truly grows. Like you have to continue to shed light on it. And that's the free exchange of speech and ideas that allows that take place. But all right, let's
let me tie that thought
Yeah.
into my FBI experience, which is exactly one of the things that I had a big problem with when I was working for the Bureau. So I worked during the Biden years. Theoretically, I worked there when Trump came in 1.0 and Biden. And the thing that blew my mind was watching the white supremacy cases that we did, which were essentially racist kids in their 20s who wore like penny loafers and khakis and got, whatever mochas at Starbucks. And my major problem was there was no violence. There was no threat of violence. There was no federal crime being violated that they were like, quote unquote, white supremacists. And so to exactly your point, I tell people this, and this is the point I used to make to my team when we were doing surveillance. I'm like, you have a constitutional right in America to be an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
You literally do.
Mm-hmm.
You can say hateful, bigoted, awful, mean-spirited things. People say all kinds of awful things about me now I'm in the public. I have people right now that are photoshopping my face and Joe Kent's on like some gay guys. And I think it's kind of funny because like we both look kind of studly. So be it. And like, if you're going to pair me up with somebody, you're going to pair me up with a former tier 1 special mission unit guy who was the director level and he like quit for principles.
Yeah, right.
Right. I could do way worse being paired up with someone than Joe Kent of all people. Like he's a freaking stud. He's like the pinnacle of studs from the global war on terror era. So like you're not gonna hurt my feelings with that. Like I'm married, I got 4 kids. Like dude, you can't hurt my feelings about masculinity, like, manhood.
Yeah, you laugh at it. If somebody's calling you gay, like it's just funny because like
it's just silly. It's silly, and it's like so have that speech if that's what it does for you. If that makes you feel better. I don't care. And even if a bunch of people saw me every day and they were like, hey, Kyle, you're gay. I'd be like, not gay for you, bro. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's just, I went to high school. I'm already out of that. I'm in my 40s now. It's too late for you to worry about stupid things that don't bother you. So more speech is better. And you're allowed to be a jerk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, and the last thing I'll say before we get into this, it's just like, I mean, that's a tell. Like the most normal people that I know, and I talk about this a lot, like are people that can just take jokes about themselves. Like they can laugh at themselves and that there's an openness to that. Like there's an open-mindedness and there's a humility to people who can take jokes. And again, it goes back to who the tyrants are, who the dictators are. And these people, and even in your own life, like even if they don't have actual like state level power, the people that can't take jokes, that cannot laugh at themselves, they're closed off. They're prickly. Like they're the hardest people to get along with. They're the people that are hard. They're hard to love. They're hard to be friends with. And everybody knows, probably maybe 1 or 2 of those individuals in their own lives. But like it's the people that are easy to be friends with, or I say just based in general, that like they can laugh at themselves. They aren't trying too hard to be something that they're not. Like it's just like there's a normalness about them. There's a baseness, there's a groundedness in these types of individuals. And I think you can look at that universally from an individual all the way up to, kind of different people that are in leadership positions. And I think the tell of someone who is a tyrant is someone that, again, needs to shut down speech or just generally cannot laugh at themselves. And that's where you see like the attacks on comedy, for example. You see that from tyrants at the state level when things get bad. And I think we've seen that from time to time for sure. And you're right. It's not a left or right issue. It's a whoever's in power trying to protect power issue. Right. So yeah, interesting stuff. But all right, man. So I told you this before we got on, so it's not going to be a surprise, but I came across you actually on Paramount Tactical. So, and that was in early October of 2025. And you made that appearance with Gary. You remember that? You remember that appearance in early
I'm trying to remember if I've been on once or twice, but I do remember doing it. And I'll just tell people, even though I don't know if I agree with Gary today, because I don't know what he's saying 100%, I like Gary and I think he's a good guy and I respect who he is, even if we don't agree on something. So yeah, it was a productive, it was a totally reasonable conversation between people who came from very different perspectives. Mm-hmm. He obviously was a Green Beret. He had a lot more experience in a very different part of the military that was very, oriented towards deployment. I never deployed. I did a bunch of training stateside. So we have similar types of friends, but at the end of the day, like, 2 people, we may disagree. We may be on 180 degrees of the same issue today, and I still would be respectful. I'm not mad at Gary. So yeah, I remember being on. I think I've been on there twice.
Okay, yeah,
and they were both good. They're productive conversations.
I had a 3 or 4 hour conversation with Gary, and I thought it went well. I thought it was valuable. I thought, obviously we don't agree on on a number of different issues relating to the Charlie Kirk assassination case. But yeah, I thought it was a good and productive conversation. So I'm with you in that. But
did you get the sense that he's a bad faith actor? Because that's where it comes down to for me.
I think that there's a lot of people that would say that he is a bad faith actor, but I personally did not think that. No, I thought that he and I think he believes what he believes and I believe what I believe. And I just think that we have a differing perspective on it ultimately is what it comes down to.
I think that's how reasonable people disagree, by the way. It's like, I don't think that you're being motivated. I had somebody accuse me of taking foreign money the other day. By the way, that's really laughable. And I think it's funny when someone says that. It's like, where is it? Who is providing it? You know, it's like, but people in this time, maybe we'll segue into that conversation with this. I saw a major break that happened during COVID. I saw that people basically chose one of two paths if they were paying attention. Some people just went along with the slop narrative and they just ate whatever came through the trough. Those are like my in-laws. I love them, but you know, they were telling me that they wouldn't see us for 5 years because they were scared that we were going to kill them because the vaccine that totally worked didn't work for them. That was a weird thing. I was like, I'm not getting my kids the shots. I'm not getting the shots. I lost my job over the shots, like whatever. But the people that paid attention had two options, right? One of them was, I'm a skeptic. Show me the evidence. Allow me to make a good decision. Don't hold it against me if I don't agree with you. That's a totally reasonable thing that reasonable people do.
Yeah.
I think you and I would probably both agree that those are the kind of people I want to talk to. And then there's the fun people. And I got a couple friends that are like this too. And they're not terrible, but they said they're lying to me, they being whoever. Whatever's being sold to me is obviously garbage, which may be true. So I'm just going to believe whatever I want. And I don't really need a basis for it. Mm-hmm. Those people are fun to know. They're very difficult to agree with oftentimes because their opinions are not grounded in anything. It's just in their feeling, and that's where they went. And, you know, God love them. They're allowed to have that in this country. It's just, you won't find me signing on for what they're about.
Yeah, and I think that's just where discernment comes in. And again, that's just another Christian virtue. I mean, I talk a lot about how Christianity is just the best way to live. And it allows us to be in a place or in like a state of discernment where we can see these, you know, various items of propaganda or what these different leaders are saying. And it allows us to evaluate from like an actual, like grounded in truth perspective. And I think that's just an extremely valuable, not just tool, but armor that we do have as Christians. And yeah, but it's that discernment, because ultimately the truth is it has nuance to it. And that seems to just always be the case. Right. And 100%, like, I think it's pretty obvious. Like if you are a person, I mean, I would say that is practicing their faith and is in that state and seat of discernment. I feel like it's pretty easy to snuff out people who are bad faith and just straight up lies that you're being told. I think that's actually the weapon to be able to do it, to be honest with you.
Well, you'll know them by their fruits, it turns out. So they may have a good game in the beginning, but at the end of the day, you usually can tell when they put their cleats on and get on the field. You're like, okay, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'm about. So.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. I mean, so as getting back to that, I mean, a part of that conversation, or at least the part that I found most interesting was you made a comment about the FBI investigation or an investigation that was ongoing based on who you know into a conspiracy involving potential foreign involvement. Maybe you didn't say foreign involvement, but I think you did say an investigation into a conspiracy regarding the Charlie Kirk assassination. I'll show you that clip so you can see the context, and we'll get to that.
Yep.
But I want to start here with the pipe bomber and the alleged FBI or CIA. You would say, do you think it's fair to call it a cover up at this point, or what would you say is the right adjective to?
100%. Oh, I 100%. But I don't think it's the cover up that people think. Again, it's very nuanced. Okay. And for everybody's awareness, like I got involved in the pipe bomber case a couple of days after January 6th of 2021, when I was an FBI agent working in the Washington field office. So this has been something that I've been interested in. I've been a part of. I love your chats going, they're like, he's a Fed. He's a former Fed. It's like, yeah, I am a former Fed. I was a former FBI agent. It's not for debate. That's not questionable. I will own it every moment. And while I was an FBI agent, one of the cases that me and my team got put on was this pipe bomber case. Quick little background on how that worked. I was on a specialty unit that did surveillance only. We were one of a few that really was thought pretty well of, even though that wasn't necessarily a very high profile job in the Bureau. And we did physical surveillance, or what we call FISR. We sat outside of houses. We followed people. We patterned their life. We found out who they talked to and where they went, what they drive. So just because you find somebody online, and this is the big difference between this is something that I think is worth people who are doing the internet research game, because there's a big gap in that if you've never been in the physical game. A lot of FBI agents fall victim to this too, especially the younger ones. They think you can find everything online, and you can find a lot of stuff online. There's no question about it. But my buddy, who's a really, really good drug and gang unit guy, he said, if you've never seen the person you're investigating with your own eyes, are you really investigating that person? And it made me think about how many of the FBI agents I worked with that never saw the person that they were dealing with until we clapped handcuffs on them. They'd outsource it to guys like me. So here I am sitting in a car, peeing in a bottle, if we're being totally honest, talking on a radio back and forth with like my team. We'd have 6 or 8 guys out there, sometimes a plane, sometimes other assets. And we would be watching front doors. When they would leave, we would call it out. We would have a team, break away and follow them. We'd all jump in line and we would follow them on every turn, wherever they went. They went into a restaurant. We'd walk through the restaurant. We might take a surreptitious photograph of them, see who they're talking to. So, maybe overhear some of the conversation and get the context of it. And so we would do that. And I was doing that on what was referred to as person of interest 3 in the pipe bomb case. For people to understand sort of the historical nature, there was person of interest 1. That's the person wearing the hoodie. The government alleges that's Brian Cole Jr. I don't think it is. Then there was a person of interest 2, and person of interest 2 was staying with person of interest 3. And we got to person of interest 3's house because of person of interest 2, who did some really weird stuff. Wore a hoodie, did a costume change, came out on the train, didn't use his own Metro card to ride the train. He actually used his friend's house that he was staying with. It turns out he hadn't seen his friend in 30 years, showed up out of nowhere, has kind of an interesting background that may or may not be intelligence related, because he used to do Christian ministry overseas, and the CIA has a pretty good footprint with the organization that he worked with. They pay Christian missionaries to make introductions and stuff like that. So all of that, just for whatever it's worth, like that, there's a whole rabbit hole of the original investigation, even in the first couple of days. And we ended up at a door of person of interest 3. And the person who lived next door to person of interest 3 turned out to be the person that the Blaze thought was the pipe bomber. And we did that completely independently. So the FBI put me outside of a door 1 week after January 6th. And last year on November 8th, the Blaze published a story saying they thought it was the next door neighbor of the door we were at. That's the broad scope of how wild this story was. And it came from my time in the FBI. Literally, like I said, the day after January 6th, I was involved in this stuff.
Wow. Okay. All right. I've got a couple clips here that we can go off of. So the first one that I want to play with you, just for maybe some entertainment purposes, but for some context, is Dan Bongino saying that his proudest moment at the FBI was catching the pipe bomber. So let's take a listen to this.
You're gonna hate, obviously, but you did get a lot done. And even I know from where I'm sitting and where everyone in the chat is sitting, people who are paying attention know all about Operation Summer Heat, and they know all about, James Comey and Letitia James and all of this. So what would you say you're most proud of?
Man, I mean, we did a lot, and I don't want to take any kind of celebratory victory laps, but, the pipe bomb case was definitely sensitive, obviously. There was a lot going on. That's an ongoing investigation. But sitting there, I was sitting down, and it was I had brought in a different group of guys to take a look at something, and I got a call from a supervisor, totally out of the blue. And he said, hey, boss, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah, why? And he said, I think we got a suspect in this case. And I got to tell you, I was like blown away, because I know we'd been busting our ass on it for a really long time.
So given your experience, tell me what's going on right there.
All right. So I have an overarching theory on what went on there. And essentially, okay, you want the whole sort of like what I think actually happened on that day?
Let's go.
I think it's really helpful to people understand. It's my current belief that Charlie Kirk, who's the person that the Blaze identified and has been now outed in a failed polygraph and has been the subject of a lot of new scrutiny again, who currently works for the CIA as what's called force protection. She's somewhere in the security apparatus. So she provides physical security and maybe personal security for anywhere up to the director of the CIA, but could be as lowly as at the gate when you drive into Langley. She's in the unit there. We don't have any specifics. She's a former Capitol police officer. And my guess is that she was probably told she was planting a training device. That's the most likely story. The devices looked like training devices. 1 week after the devices were found, I asked a very specific question to the member of the JTTF that was briefing my team, and it was relevant because of what's called officer safety. And I said, were these devices capable of going off? Were these devices that were designed to function as they looked? And he said they looked very bomb-like, but essentially that they were inert. And that's relevant because when you're doing security, if you're doing surveillance or security and you need to try to, do standoff, the safe distance away from an explosive device, we play the game very differently on how we watch you. If I think that you might be wearing a vest or if you're carrying a backpack that could explode and kill people, within 350 feet, we're going to handle things differently. And so we were told that that was not a threat to us at that time. And that's really relevant because afterwards, the FBI went on in filings to say that these are quote unquote viable devices, which is not a word that explosive ordnance technicians use. Buddies of mine that were all over the country had already gotten briefed up on the fact that the bombs were not explosive capable at the time, that they had all the elements, but they weren't necessarily capable of going off. And we know they weren't capable of going off because they didn't go off. Just so we could they had a 1 hour timer and they didn't go off. So whatever the hell that means. So that's kind of the bigger thing. I think she placed devices that were a training exercise. There's further evidence of that, which is that when they were found, nobody acted like they had explosives right next to them that were like in imminent danger of blowing up. You had people that were lazing around. You had a Capitol police officer who was in a plainclothes role, walks over and tells a Secret Service member who was on Kamala Harris's detail at the time, and a DC Metro police officer sitting in a car in the blast radius, by the way, of a theoretical bomb. Hey, we just got this thing. We don't know what the conversation was. And they finished their sandwich. They finished eating. There's video footage of these guys like finishing the sandwich they had for their lunch. And in that time, you had children walk in front of where the bomb was. There was a train that passed. There were vehicles that drove by. That's not the way you behave. That's not the way any law enforcement officer is trained to do it. Now, if I told you something different, Zach, if I walked up to you and I said, hey, man, we're in the middle of a training exercise. The device is actually like 20 feet to your left. No big deal right now. Feel free to finish your lunch. We're going to need a cordon in a second. We're going to call in a response to it. You might act that way. That would be very different, would it not?
Yeah, 100%.
You just don't need to have the same level of imminence and immediacy to this action. So the other problem is the guy who found that bomb, he got out of his car and in under 11 and a half minutes, he went to the only two places that the figure in the hoodie the night before had stopped. One of them was a bush outside of the Congressional Black Caucus where the pipe bomber wearing the hoodie sat, crisscross applesauce, by the way, sat down, put a backpack in front of them, reached into it, rummaged in, seemed to place something, and then removed that thing from underneath the bush. Then they stood up, walked over, and then left the bomb in front of that the bench that many people are familiar with. You've seen the footage, so on and so forth. And then the Capitol police officers in what's called the CSU unit or the counter surveillance unit, they got out of their car. They looked nowhere else. They looked at no other bushes. They walked directly to the bush the pipe bomber had been at the night before, looked under it, walked past it, stood, probably went like, hey, man, isn't it supposed to be under there? Yeah, I think it is. Walked back, broke like 90 degrees in their hips and looked under the bush again, saw nothing, and then went directly, after looking at their phones, to the place where the bomb was actually found. And then everybody was super chill about it. So there's no way that you can convince me that the United States Capitol Police did not have an awareness of what it was and that it wasn't a real threat at the time. By the way, that kills the case against Brian Cole Jr. because for the government's case to actually work, it has to be a viable bomb. And Brian Cole Jr.'s attorneys, he's got two sets. One are civil rights attorneys that are arguing for a pardon. They're out of Atlanta. The other set is the Litzen firm out of Nashville. And they're arguing for like acquittal and or they're looking to get him released immediately. They're proving that the government is a mess. For whatever it's worth, the guys at the Litzen firm are freaking killers. I know people that have used them in litigation. I knew ATF agents that had worked with him. He's a former federal prosecutor and he used to be a political analyst at the CIA. He's really, really capable, this guy, Alex Little. And his team is Zach Lawson and some other guys. They're freaking studs for whatever it's worth. And they're doing a really good job. But we have to look at the totality of the circumstances. Somebody placed these devices. There was a reaction to it. It was used in sentencing enhancements. It caused a shutdown and a censorship, like we were talking about earlier, of people self-censoring a lot because they were terrified of being wrapped up in January 6th for the entire Biden years. And you cannot convince me the United States Capitol Police didn't know about it. A couple other things we should add to it. And by the way, I'm going to get to why Dan Bongino didn't know what he was talking about because that's all relevant here. One of the people that got really, really involved in this case.
The next clip that I have for you, just so you know, is I posted that on X of Dan Bongino saying that, and then you responded with he's cooked with a video that you put together from your show. So I actually want to play that because you start to get into some of the court documents here and some of the days and the time of that November 12th date. that you bring up, and I think that that's all important. And that can get us actually into the court filings that came out on this.
Okay.
And then you can maybe touch on those. So let's actually bring that in now, since you're bringing it up. So let's take a look at some of this clip. And if you want me to stop at any point, just let me know.
Yeah, I'll give you a timeout on the hands.
Yeah, sounds good.
I don't know if you remember this. This is before you became the deputy FBI director. You put a post on X right after this happened. And you said there's a massive cover-up because the person that planted those pipe bombs, they don't want you to know who it is, because it's either a connected anti-Trump insider or an inside job. You said that, long before you were even thought of as deputy FBI director.
Hold it for 1 second.
Yep.
This is the single instance of journalistic pursuit that Sean Hannity has done in the last decade. It's just like, it's mind-blowing. It goes down in the archives as being the only hard question I think he's ever asked for his own guests. It's so good. And now watch Dan. Dan looks like someone kicked him in the nuts. I call him Daniel because Tom Massey calls him Daniel, and I really like that. Daniel is immediately going to give you the most low-energy response. And I want people to look at the difference between the energy when he's on his podcast and when he was the deputy director of the FBI. The long version of this, or the sort of the short version, so people should understand, he did not know what happened at the FBI. There's no question in my mind. The only things he knew was what was briefed to him. And that was a danger when he walked in. The deputy director is usually someone who spent 20 years in the bureau, knows every single person, knows all their dirty secrets. Like, I know a lot of dirty secrets after being there 6 years. I've got a lot of connections that will tell me, hey, did you know that this guy was sleeping with this person? That person was caught naked with their supervisor in the gym. Like, all the dirty stuff that you should know. The deputy director usually knows that. So they don't promote certain people, and they know how to lean on certain people for the things they've done. Who owes who a favor, whose career is hitched to what. Dan knew none of that stuff. He was a podcaster for 13 years. Then he stepped into this role and he got freaking snowed immediately. And you can see he's about to give you the most distanced language you could ever do. I think you're going to be pretty comfortable. I'm pretty comfortable. The American people are going to be kind of comfortable. This is not how law enforcement talks. So just listen to that as you play it.
Yeah, and so basically Hannity's saying, you said this on your podcast.
Yeah, he's calling him out.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, bro, like, you used to say something completely different. Where are you on that now? And now he's going to tell you, I used to get paid to make stuff up. I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Yeah.
Now I have to deal with facts. The fact is, he didn't even know how to read the case file. If I had to guess, I'm guessing he didn't even know how to get in there. Every single thing he got was briefed. And that plays into what my sort of analysis is, which, by the way, I've had some confirmation on that. I just can't disclose why.
Well, I don't want to get too far. I don't want to go off topic, but he did something very similar with the Epstein files as well. He talked a big game about him before he got in there, and 100% then completely went a 180. But anyway, yeah. So basically that's for you guys, that Sean Hannity's essentially calling him out for that regarding this case.
Yeah, that's why I said to you, this investigation's just begun. I was smiling at you because I certainly remember the moment. Darren remembers it too. He said, "Are you sitting down?" Called me on the phone. I said, "Oh boy, why? Is this bad news?" And he said, "I think we got him." What exactly that tip was, we're going to have to pass on that for right now while we're still, obviously we're in the prologue of a long book. This is just the beginning. This is not the end of the investigation, as you all well know, having reported on these for a long time. We are pretty comfortable. We have our guy. I think as again, legal process starts to surface and information, facts start to come out, the public's going to be very comfortable with the investigation. Listen, I was paid in the past, Sean, for my opinions. That's clear. And one day I'll be back in that space. But that's not what I'm paid for now. I'm paid to be your deputy director, and we base investigations on facts.
Something of a rough.
So before we get into your explanation here, so you're highlighting that November 12th date, and so what's important about that, given what Dan Bongino is saying right there?
All right, and I don't know if it covers it in the clip because I can't remember what I put out there, but here's the real quick piece. The timeline goes as follows. Steve Baker started doing this investigation into who was the pipe bomber, and it actually came out very naturally. He was investigating use of force on January 6th, specifically less than lethal force. So for non-law enforcement, that's going to be pepper balls, that's tasers, that's tear gas, etc. And one of the people who was using them was up on the high terrace and was actually shooting at people in a way that is probably not commensurate with what's called less than lethal. It's actually, you can use a less than lethal tool. Let's say a baton. That's a great example. If I use a baton, Zach, and you're trying to grab me and I smack you in the hands, which is what I was trained to do, that's less than lethal. If you try to go for my gun or you produce a weapon and I crack you in the head, that's lethal force with a less than lethal tool. Does that make sense? So pepper ball can use the same way. If you fire a pepper ball at 300 plus feet per second in the eye socket, in the temporal, if you hit somebody in the head, in the jawline, in the throat, and it paralyzes their larynx or something, you can use a less than lethal tool in a lethal way, which is why it's actually marked on those guns. Do not fire above the shoulders. In fact, I think they recommend below the legs because you're trying to get compliance. You're not trying to get injury or death. And so that's what Steve Baker was investigating. That story published on November the 4th. We find out from the court filings that on November the 6th, Charlie Kirk, the woman that they investigated and outed, who, by the way, was 5'7" and is a former soccer player whose, colors aligned with the colors of the shoe that were being investigated for the pipe bomber. And she was physically present on the Capitol on January the 6th. And she obviously was there on the 5th because that was her job. She worked in the area. There's a gate analysis piece to it all that kind of came out. All of that was already known to the intelligence community, specifically people at ODNI, DHS, et cetera. But what's crazy is that the story publishes on the 4th. The FBI brings her in for a polygraph on the 6th, and she fails it. Specifically, 2 critical questions. Did you place those pipe bombs, and did you place those pipe bombs that evening? Now, in the intelligence community, if you fail a polygraph, like that's usually the end of your clearance, at least for now. They'll suspend it and they'll reinvestigate you. It's not the end all be all. It's not a criminal liability, but it means it's time for you to be looked into. And the example I gave is that I've got a training officer, my training agent, when I joined the Bureau, he was Chinese ethnically, came to the United States when he was 14, failed a polygraph while at the FBI for the CIA because he was going to go do a CIA joint duty. And they kicked him out of my skiff. He was no longer allowed to have access to top secret information. He was no longer in the space where we handled top secret information. And he got put on very low security type stuff. He was doing background investigations that didn't have anything special involved. Public trust only, like what a cop would do. So it's really relevant that if you fail a polygraph, you're in bad space.
And what I want to jump in here and say is, because you get a lot of people that are like, well, it's not just about failing the polygraph. Like, people fail polygraphs all the time. But what you get in here, I want you to listen to yourself here, because what you then start to describe is the bigger picture of when you're being polygraphed, what they're looking at. And let's play you here, and then you can tell me when to stop when you want to comment on it here, because you do get into this.
Tough day for Dan Bongino and his credibility. We all saw that he did a press conference celebrating the arrest of Brian Cole Jr. Here's a filing that was done today. This is April 1st, 2026, in the District Court of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. It is a filing by his counsel, and it starts with the following. Charlie Kirk was named a person of interest in the January 5th, January 6th pipe bomb investigation. She was a U.S. Capitol Police officer on January 6th and present at the Capitol on that date. Ms. Kirk now works for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. According to discovery produced by the government in this case, the FBI began investigating, questioning, and covertly surveilling Ms. Kirk during the time it began investigating Mr. Cole. Now, that's the story. It's not all the way there. In fact, they actually started investigating her before they went after Brian Cole, and this timeline is really relevant. Now, let me break it down for you. On November 6th, which was 2 days after the Blaze released a story about Ms. Kirk as a Capitol Police officer, potentially using lethal force in a way that was not justified, in other words, less than lethal tools in a way that could be lethal, headshots with paintball guns and so on. 2 days later, the FBI apparently decided to take her in and do a polygraph investigation. She was asked 2 relevant questions. 1, did you place those pipe bombs? And 2, did you place those pipe bombs that evening? Ms. Kirk failed the polygraph. The FBI polygraph examiner noted that Kirchhoff's, quote, very controlled reaction to the news of her failing the polygraph and seemingly rehearsed responses to the polygraph examiner's questions. Let me tell you a little something about polygraphs. People who know anything about polygraphs know that the polygraph isn't just when the machine is on. In fact, the investigation and the person who is doing the polygraph is assessing you the entire time you're there. As you get kitted up, they make small talk with you. As they put the machine on you, they ask you some preference questions. They set up what the parameters of the response are going to be, and then they ask you the questions. And after they're done, they take the machine, they turn it off, and they continue to ask you questions and probe. And if you are to contradict some of your answers, or you give some information that might be, let's say, indicative of deception that was done previously, it still counts. The people that know and have been coached on how to handle polygraphs know that the polygraph is not over once the polygraph machine is turned off. This is something I confirmed with a senior retired Army intel guy. This is not something that is foreign to people who've worked in this service, but if you've never been around polygraphs, you might as well know what it looks like. So let's go back to the tape here. This is the filing on November 7th, 5 days before the FBI started a file on Brian Cole Jr. they named Ms. Kirkhoff as a person of interest. The government immediately issued subpoenas and preservation requests. This is all commensurate with a normal investigative process. Some reason on November the 12th, the same day that the government officially opened its investigation into Mr. Cole, FBI agents continued to question Ms. Kirkhoff, her boyfriend, Dan Dickert, and they also started talking to people at the U.S. Capitol Police. The interesting thing about the day that they opened that investigation is that's the same day that Dan Bongino called Tom Massey and made some threats, made some claims, and stated that he would actually personally fund the defamation lawsuit that Charlie Kirk would bring against people who were reporting against her. Isn't that interesting? Do you think the FBI played Dan Bongino, never told him that she failed a polygraph, never told him that she was a person of interest, and then only presented things in a sort of offhanded way? If I had to speculate, and this is my speculation, I believe Dan Bongino was told that they already investigated her. She wasn't the person. They didn't bring up the fact that she had just failed a polygraph, which, by the way, is grounds for losing your security clearance. At the very minimum, you're removed from your job. This happened to one of my training agents while I was in the FBI. Failed a polygraph, not even at our agency, wasn't allowed to come back in. My guess is Dan got played by the very FBI that he thought he was running, because from the beginning, they were always running him. And his whole PR tour and the victory lap and the fact that these guys were rushing between Bondi and Pirro, Patel, Bongino, all rushing to get to a microphone so they could all say that they got the pipe bomber. I think they all got caught in this trap. I think they all jumped onto the flypaper, and now they're going to be wriggling. You guys tell me what you think. Put a comment below.
So do you still agree with your own statement from right there?
I agree with me. Yeah. No, I really do. It's fun to watch these things. They're little time capsules of these moments that I had. This actually wasn't even on the podcast. I actually just created this so people could understand what was going on in short form.
It's such a great breakdown. But I guess one of the questions that I have for you is why, because I know they get to this in some of the court filings, but why did they eventually call off the investigation from Charlie Kirk? And when did this turn to Brian Cole Jr.?
Oh, we don't know. Okay. No, we know they opened the case on the 12th, and the 12th is also critical. That's when Bongino called Tom Massey. A few things happened during that conversation, one of which was he said he would fund her lawsuit. I think that's freaking insane. There's no reason that the FBI deputy director. He also said during that time, and I have that from a source that was, party of the conversation, so take that for whatever it's worth, and also people that had been reporting on it for a while, that got it secondhand, that Dan said, "We're working diligently to clear her." The FBI does not work diligently to clear anyone. What we do is we do logical investigative steps. And so when I was working there, that's what happened. If you gave me a case and you alleged that somebody was a child sex predator, I would go and attempt to prove that the person was a child sex predator. Now, I may use the tactic of setting out to disprove that, because that's actually a really good tactic. You kind of like steelman your argument by going against it. So I try to find, is there any exculpatory information that explains these circumstances, which would help me understand? And I've done that before. It's actually really, really, it's vindicating that that you're doing the work of truth if something comes up where you're like, I read the story, I got briefed on it, I got sent this guy, I started investigating him, he looked guilty as sin. And then when I zoom back far enough and I unsealed some court filings and I look back into 15 years worth of experience, and then I understood what was really going on here. In fact, this guy's not a bad guy. He just, violated some like local ordinance on travel restrictions, but he's actually not a bad guy. And so that was a real specific experience for me. Reminder, we don't clear people in law enforcement. But occasionally people are cleared when you find exculpatory information. That's fine. That's not what Dan said. So all of this is pretty crazy. Now, I also, I'm 100% confident that Dan Bongino did not know that they did the polygraph, that she failed. I also know some other really interesting things about Dan. You guys can find the stories. ProPublica reported on him. I think it was William Turton did a story about how Dan Bongino failed his polygraph and was waived and didn't have to do a polygraph. So Dan may believe that people in the FBI don't have to pass a polygraph, or people who work for the CIA don't either, or whatever else. It's standard for anybody that has what's called a TSSCI. So that's a top secret secured compartmented information clearance. You have to have a polygraph. It's usually what's called full scope. Part of it is lifestyle. So the way that you live, that's going to be your finances, whether you're faithful to your wife, academic dishonesty, etc. And the other one is the counterintelligence one. That's going to be your foreign contacts. Have you ever dealt with people in a way that you're not allowed to? Have you lied about places you've gone, crimes you've gotten away with, etc. So they do this full scope poly. I had one. I was a full scope poly guy. I was able to go into any SCIF anywhere. I could go sit with, the Pentagon, or I could go to CIA or anything else. If Dan didn't have that, he was waived. So maybe he doesn't know the process. But to be fair, Dan was only at the FBI. Daniel was there for like 292 days. So, that's like an indoctrination to just understand what was happening. It's been my contention since the beginning. And I'm negative on Dan because I think he stole an opportunity from the American people. But my belief is that he never knew what was going on there, that he only could trust people that he had been saying for a long time couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
And again, that's what you had that Sean Hannity moment where he said the government was in on it. It was pretty clear based on the stuff I told you earlier on. I mean, some people were in on it. Here's what you probably didn't know. And this is some other really wild stuff. Not only did the Capitol Police officer get out of his car and go directly to a bush and then go find the bomb, that guy was promoted to become the liaison between Capitol Police and the FBI, so that all information that went from Capitol Police to FBI went through the guy who found the second bomb. And by the way, he never looked for another bomb. They just quit after they found 2 bombs, which is crazy. You don't do that in law enforcement. The second thing is the on-scene commander from the ATF, who, by the way, would have had access to things like training bombs and stuff like that. He became the boss of the guy at the counter surveillance unit. He was the one who was promoted from ATF. He went into U.S. Capitol Police. I've never heard of anyone doing that. It's completely illogical. He took over the job of Yogananda Pittman after she went out to Berkeley, so she got kind of outsourced. Then the top investigator for Thomas Massie, who's been on the committee with Barry Loudermilk, they've been really digging into this story, and they always wanted to know what the truth was of the January 6th pipe bomb. His top investigator was a guy named Marshall Yates. When Kash Patel and Dan Bongino got in March of last year, Marshall Yates became the congressional liaison. He went from being a congressional staffer investigating the pipe bomb to the congressional liaison for the FBI going back to Congress. So you can start seeing these people got moved into positions where the information flow was really cut down in the triangle. They put in stopgaps in all these places. So I do think the FBI was part of a cover-up. I just don't think that the actual agents that were doing the investigation had any sort of nefarious purpose. In the same way, I don't allege that Charlie Kirk had nefarious purpose. It's very easy to do what's called siloing. So if I were to call you up, Zach, and I'm like, hey, man, I need you to favor Forgotten Country. You got to do this thing. I need you to go drop off this package. Can you go put it over here? And so you go do that. And then a week later, you see that the package you dropped off ended up being something full of child pornography, and that person was arrested. And you're like, wait, am I the bad guy? And someone puts a hand around your shoulder and just goes, look, man, we're never going to talk about that thing I asked you to do the other night. And by the way, if you do talk about it, you're never going to talk to anybody ever again, and neither are your wife and kids. And you're like, okay, that's scary. That's the kind of thing that I imagine can go on, because that person never came forward after 5 years. And if it was a training exercise, you would just go, hey, FBI, you don't need a $25,000 reward. It was me. It was a training exercise. Why did you never speak up? We've got you covered. By the way, we're moving you into a job at the CIA where we've now scrubbed your social media, which Shawnee Kirkhoff's social media was scrubbed. Your address is scrubbed. She moved from the place she was living at the time in with her boyfriend, and that address has been taken off the public record. So you can go and look for his address. I know what it is, but like you can't find it now because it's been scrubbed off. So they had all these sort of like anonymization tools that were utilized when she went to CIA. And so once you realize the bigger picture, and the fact that it doesn't actually take like the whole of government to screw over the American people, you really just need like a half dozen people. There's probably some members of Congress who made the call in there, whether there was another member or two. And there's some more information that it's not mine to give out yet, but there's some more information about communications that were happening at Capitol Police. But here's my overarching theory. I think the Capitol Police were complicit in dropping it, whether they knew what they were doing or not. There was somebody that was controlling Capitol Police that would have planned it. And I think that the ATF was somehow peripherally involved in it, even if it was just like, hey, can you give us this thing? By the way, that thing we used, you could never talk about it, and now you got a promotion. And I think the CIA was help in the mop up. And I think the FBI did the actual cover up by running a case that they were never going to catch. They deliberately released video footage, which everybody has seen, that is 1 frame per second. You do video editing. I do video editing. There's no frames that are 1 frame per second anywhere. You don't get that. And rather than it being 16:9 or some sort of reasonable aspect ratio, they reduced it to 4:3. So they changed the aspect ratio, they changed the frame rate, and they deliberately released things that were not useful for comparison. Because you've got kids, right?
Yeah.
You watch your kids. Can you hear them upstairs and have a pretty good idea which one of them it is that's running around?
Yes.
It's 100% the case that there are people in our lives that we recognize. If you had a neighbor that you've seen come to your house 100 times and they came up and it was nothing but shadows coming through your front lawn, at dusk, you'd know who that person is because you know the way they walk. We recognize certain things like that. Gait analysis is a very human concept. You don't need a machine to do it. A lot of us do it every day with our spouse. We do it with our friends. We do it with our kids. And so the concept that you're dealing with somebody who, if you wanted to hide it, what you would do is you would take footage and you would degrade it so that nobody can see it and go, oh, I recognize that person's walk. And by the way, the footage you're showing right now is a very specific right foot crossover gait, which is not very normal. And I talked to Steve Baker about this. I'm like, who does that? And he was like, people who've had catastrophic injuries to their right tibia. And I was like, that's funny. He's like, nobody can normally do this. You can't do a right leg cross the way that you see this woman. One of them on the right is Charlie Kirk in uniform. The other is the pipe bomb subject. You can't normally do that if you're a regular person. Essentially, you're making a right turn and your right leg crosses on the outside of your left foot. It's not common to make that because you have to do a swing around with the other foot. And when I told him I could do it, he was like, well, have you ever injured your right tibia? And I'm like, yeah, I had a 6-inch stress fracture. I broke it when I was in the military. I broke my right tibia and I can do that pivot, but I had to learn how to run again. And I learned how to compensate so that I don't injure myself anymore. You're seeing some things that are essentially like an ice skater. If you guys have ever seen an ice skater, they kind of like do that weird kind of crossover where one leg goes over the other. And that's not normal when you walk for regular people. This is not indicative of the only thing, but then you add on some additional circumstances that make it really relevant. Yeah. Here's what they are. She's the same height. She's the same weight. She's the same build. She clearly has the same interesting, weird right foot crossover. She was physically in the area. This is not some woman we found in California. She lived down the street. She worked at the Capitol. She was at the Capitol. And then she was at the Capitol the next day. So those are all relevant. The last thing is that I think is incredibly damning, and nobody seems to discuss it. There was a report released by Barry Loudermilk, Tom Massey, and the committee that was looking into the pipe bomber in January of 2025. And on that report, they mentioned that they found something like 180 something cell phone numbers. My numbers may be off. 51 of those cell phone numbers were law enforcement related. The only way you'd know that is that they're part of a thing called FirstNet. And FirstNet is a cell phone service that basically just prioritizes data. If you're a cop, if you're a firefighter, if you're a nurse, if you work in an emergency room, if you're a teacher, I think they give you some deals. And they tier data 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to like 6 or 8. I had a FirstNet phone that was personal. It was like a tier 4 phone. And I had a tier 1 phone from my work because I work for the FBI. So my FBI phone was a FirstNet phone. There was allegedly a FirstNet phone that pinged in the locations of both bomb drop sites. And we learned from the Loudermilk report that all law enforcement phones were not considered as potentials for the pipe bomber going back to the early weeks of the investigation. They just threw out 51 cell phone pings that were in the area. All of this stuff goes to what Dan Bongino used to know before he was the deputy director. Daniel used to say one thing a lot. There was an inside job. It was probably an anti-Trump insider. There was somebody that had access to government information. And that has nothing to do with whether or not the pipe bomber evaded cameras, which they did, went through places that you wouldn't know how to go if you were just an autistic guy who lived in Woodbridge, Virginia, which Brian Cole is. Brian Cole Jr., they can't even tie him to Washington, D.C. more than one time a year. And as a guy who used to do foot surveillance and move around in D.C. for a living and jog there and PT on the National Mall and all that kind of stuff, it's not an inherently logical place to move around. DC is done like a pie instead of like a normal grid. Each individual area might be a grid, but it's like a pie chart. It's a complete mess around the Capitol too, by the way. And the pipe bomber went through a hidden door that was like a fence that you don't know that you can walk up to and get through unless you know you can get through. There's a bunch of things that are just outside the range of possibility. And you stack them all up together and you go, well, it's not Brian Cole Jr. By the way, his defense attorneys haven't argued it yet, but Steve Baker also found a car that is the same make, model, year, color, and driving in the same area that the cell phone ping was supposed to be per the FBI's case, driving directly at the cell phone tower, and it's a mile and change away from where Brian Cole Jr. was supposedly dropping off pipe bombs while he's on foot. So he can't be at two places at once, and if they can show that, there's no way a jury in Washington, D.C. convicts a black autistic guy who's a fan of My Little Pony of doing the pipe bomb case when there's the possibility, just looking at the video, you're like, yeah, that's reasonable doubt right there. The case is cooked. It's already over. And for Dan to hang his hat on it, he didn't know about the polygraph. I imagine he probably didn't know about a lot of stuff because I don't think they briefed him in on it. I just think he was just running blind, unfortunately.
So I want to get into what the defense team for Brian Cole Jr. is doing now. I think before we got on, you mentioned that basically they're saying straight up that he's a patsy. He's not involved. And you mentioned that for every moment that he's held in custody, they're considering it what a violation of his rights.
Yeah, his civil liberties for sure.
Civil liberties. Mm-hmm. But so what the defense team did is, so basically the failed polygraph was a part of what's called sensitive information in this case that they were not allowed to release to the public.
Well,
So-
that's the argument. So there's an argument about that. But yes, that's the argument that the government made.
That's the argument that the government's going back to them saying that you're in contempt. And I think
Yes.
the government's saying that because what? Personal details, maybe the address of Kirchhoff's boyfriend was included in that. So they're using that little smidge as an excuse to say that they're in contempt. Is that what they're doing?
So it's twofold. Yes, the personal information was not redacted from the public filing, and it should have been probably. And Brian Cole's team actually admits, like,
Admitted
we
that.
actually blew that. Yeah,
Admitted
that's
that.
on the subpoenas. So they just wiped off the address. That's easy to do. They pulled it back. They filed that under seal. But their argument is that there is no reason to hold them in contempt because the information, broadly speaking, specifically the stuff about the polygraph, is not sensitive. And so I went into a pretty big detail on it. And I don't know if you have the documents there, but I can wing it from memory. On December 11th of 2025. The court entered in a pretty standard gag order for this case. And so people understand there are regular things that you put in. They don't just invent these out. Like they're what's called boilerplate, or in the FBI, we call them ponies. This is the document. We're going to file the regular document. I want the following things. Click, click, click. Yes, I want all these different parameters. Maybe I don't want the entire gag order on everything. I just want the gag order on stuff you get from discovery. You could talk about some things, but just not the stuff that the government gives you, whatever. And so they do this. And that's what happened on December 11th. And so that court filing ends up specifically identifying what they called sensitive information. And it's in paragraph 4 of that document. And there are multiple different subparagraphs in there that say, this is what we consider to be sensitive. A, B, C, D, all the way through like G, I think. Sensitive description of part C is what the government claimed you cannot reveal the information about Charlie Kirk because of you cannot give true names, and that's a real specific word. You cannot give true names and photographs. And then they stopped. And Brian Cole Jr.'s team makes the argument, well, we'll finish that sentence, y'all, because it's not that hard to do.
Yeah.
True name is the thing that we use in the intelligence world when we start talking about people who have assumed an alias. True name is my name. I'm Kyle Seraphin. But maybe I go by Kyle Wilson on my fake ID that I have that the government issued me so that I can run either as an undercover or I can run as what's called a low visibility, nominally backstopped, whatever, surveillance agent. You can be issued what's called an alternate federal ID. That's a real ID from the real state that you want to be in. And it really goes to a backstop. And if a cop were to run it, they'll really find that you have a driving record and a license and everything else. And they will get you real insurance for it. And they will get you real credit cards in that name with a fake credit record. The government does this all the time. AFID, as it's called, alternate federal ID. When you have one of those, you ask somebody, they say, hey, Kyle, I need you to fly out to Salt Lake City. You need to be on the first plane on Sunday morning. It's like, okay, roger that. Am I flying in true name or am I flying AFID? That's the question you would ask. And when they make the claim, true name, the rest of that little section for paragraph 4, section C says, you cannot use the true name and photographs of agents of the government operating in undercover capacity for this investigation specifically. So one of two things happened. And I think Cole's attorneys are pointing this out. Either the government nominally and accidentally sort of like tacitly admitted that she was an undercover agent of the United States government regarding this case. That's a real wild part. Like that's the wildest part. The other possibility,
because they're using her name, Charlie Kirk, which is her real name,
which is her true name.
Yeah.
Now the other possibility is, and I think this is probably more likely, just between us. I don't need to go off in the deep end. I think the government was making a dishonest argument where they were trying to apply a paragraph by only showing a small section of it, and they wanted to say this is because it's her quote unquote true name. They ignored the fact that it's only true name when in fact you're dealing with an undercover. And so they make so the government makes the argument. The defense filing comes back and says, hey, she's not an undercover. That's what they kind of say. I don't know if it's tongue in cheek or not, but they're saying it. And they're like, we need this information. We needed this information. And we require all of this information right now so that we have the ability to assess whether or not we want to file the following defense. Now, when you're accused, you can file any reasonable defense you want, right? There's an insanity plea. There's an alternate theory of the crime, which is what they're kind of arguing. And they want to say, if you give us all the stuff, we want the polygraph, we want all the subpoena results, we want the videos. Apparently she was alibied by a video of her dog with her voice off camera. I've never heard of this before, but they're letting people know, like, this is the stuff that you're claiming.
And so that's, I think, one of the second items that the defense team is requesting are those videos that I guess the FBI or the CIA, whoever provided, as far as that sensitive evidence goes, of her being caught on video that night of January 5th. It's her. So It's her voice. It's not actually her on camera. It's her voice talking to her dog.
So here's the evolution of the story. Steve Baker puts out his story on December the 4th. I think it might have been December the 5th, but I think it was the 4th. They arrest Brian Cole Jr. And then a couple days later, the mainstream media comes out and debunks the story of Charlie Kirk immediately. And it's CBS was the first one to run it, as far as I know. I actually think I know the editors over there. They're good people. They're not mean people. And they said, according to 3 sources, no further information. We don't know if the sources are like the dog, the boyfriend, and Charlie Kirk. We don't know if the sources are like FBI agents. If it's one guy who said attribute this to 3 sources, but here's what it is.
Right.
They say, and by the way, I kind of lean on that one. I think it might be like a Marshall Yates types, if I'm going to guess. I'm guessing, but I just think that it could be like someone like Marshall Yates working for the Bureau. They said, according to 3 sources, Charlie Kirk could not have been the pipe bomber dropping those devices, which I allege are training devices and not real devices anyway, because she was busy playing with her puppies on that night. Well, here's the problem. My buddy is a very thorough investigator, and I went down the rabbit hole. I went through every scrape of the deep web that I could find, finding out about what her dog situation was. I was able to find the Greyhound service that she adopted the dog from down in Florida. It's one dog. It's an old dog. Nobody would confuse that with puppies, plural, and it's the only one they have. And then my friend went and found the dog walker and found the review of the dog walker done by Charlie Kirk, which has since been wiped from the web from Google reviews. And so he talked to the person and found it very weird that when the dog walker came in, the dog walker actually had to go through an interview and a security interview by the government in order to be a dog walker for a freaking security guard at the U.S. Capitol and a Capitol Police security guard. So all that's really weird. The crazy thing is that the story morphed from she was playing with her puppies to then I got a letter from the attorneys allegedly representing Charlie Kirk. She makes like $100,000 a year. Her attorneys cost like almost $2,000 an hour. She cannot afford those. I'll objectively tell you that's not the case. And neither can I. I can't afford a $2,000 an hour attorney. It's insane. I can't afford a $1,000 hour attorney. I actually have attorneys defending me right now that normally charge $1,000 an hour, and they cut me a massive discount and gave me a flat rate. And I think they're really regretting they did that right now because it gets super expensive. My law fees right now in another case would be like 50 grand because the FBI director's girlfriend is suing me, which all this is related, by the way. So
hold on. Alexis Wilkins is suing you?
Yeah, for $5 million.
Is she really?
I was the first one. So you probably heard of like Elijah Schaefer being sued. You heard of Sam Parker being sued. She sued me first. And then I think her team, when they saw our filing, was like, oh crap, we didn't sue anybody else that said things. Let's go after the people that are way upstream. Like I said one thing one time that I've actually already corrected. I was like, oh, I got 2 people's names mixed up. She's not a former Mossad agent. She used to work for an IDF intelligence officer. Those are not quite the same thing. It's an honest mistake. And so anyway, we've already argued that. But that's sitting out there waiting in the public sphere to find out whether or not the judge rules that there's any credentials on that. The long and short of it is attorneys are super expensive. This girl cannot afford a $2,000 an hour attorney. I promise you. I made a salary at or above what she makes. And so here we go. The letter I got said that she was caring for her dog on that night, according to video evidence. That's what the folks at Claire Locke, and just for people's conspiracy-oriented minds, which I am not generally, but this one is good. Claire Locke is the same defamation attorneys that represented Dominion Voting Systems.
Oh, no.
Who sued Fox News for defamation and received $750 million over the election machines and the potential of being a stolen election in 2020. So my general sort of analysis is that I'm not being sued by, let me just tell you what my wife says. She said, we're being sued by the CIA. So that's how that looks to those of us that are paying attention, because I know for a fact that the girl who works at the CIA can't afford those attorneys. And by the way, they've done some real deep state shady stuff. So we've gone from she was playing with her puppies on camera, and that's why she couldn't have done it, to she was caring for her dog on camera. That's what the attorneys told me when they told me to cease and desist and never talk about this again. And then the third thing comes in the filing that we saw, which just dropped the other day. And the filing says we would like the video that allegedly has her voice off camera with the dog in picture.
Yeah.
So apparently the video we're talking about is someone videoing the dog that she has, this Greyhound, and she's talking off camera, which you totally cannot fake. Obviously, you know that. You've never been able to add a voice to a video.
No, you can't do that. You can't put audio on top of. You can't use B-roll.
They didn't. I mean, they didn't even talk about. We're talking about the simplest, like lowest level of potential to be able to defraud this sort of thing. So, so that's really, really shady. And here's the other thing: Steve Baker has not been sued by Claire Locke. Neither have I. If they do, they're not going to get anything. It's going to be a waste of their time. They probably know that. I'm not nearly interesting enough to be sued by Claire Locke, who destroys, companies like Fox News and gets Tucker Carlson fired. So whatever that's worth for people, we're dealing with lawyers that this girl can't afford in situations where the FBI deputy director is going to cover for her, God knows why. And all of the logical investigative steps. We don't know why they shut the investigation and why they found another guy. And by the way, Brian Cole Jr. meets none of the criteria that anybody who knew anything about this case said. Can I drop the last little bombshell on you for your audience?
Please do.
I know people that live in Brian Cole Jr.'s neighborhood that work for the FBI. Okay. And they have seen him walk thousands of times. They've seen him walk for about a decade. He walks multiple times a day and he wanders around the neighborhood with his little tiny dog, and he goes down to the same 7-Eleven every single day at the same time. And he gets the same 2 slices of pizza and a Coke every single time. And the guy who's at the 7-Eleven says, there's no way that's the same guy. Steve Baker interviewed him. My friend who's in the neighborhood said there's no way. And by the way, that neighborhood is lousy with feds. It's got FBI agents. It's got Secret Service agents. There's a Secret Service couple that are bomb detectors. They run 2 bomb squad dogs that live in their home that wander around the neighborhood like you would have to walk your dog, that work for the Secret Service, that are like maybe 8 or 9 houses down from Brian Cole Jr. This guy is not it. Okay. And here's the last crazy thing. When they did the search warrant at his house, they didn't seize his car, which allegedly was the transporting device for the bombs. I've never heard of that. The FBI is holding on to vehicles that you can't even imagine. When I was up in Shelby, Montana, working on Indian crimes, there was a truck that had been sitting in the garage for 10 years because the owner of it had died and he was in this homicide investigation. He didn't have any next of kin. So they just held on to the vehicle. Like, if you seize somebody's stuff and you think that the vehicle was part of the interstate transportation of delivering an explosive device to the United States Capitol on January the 5th and 6th, you're keeping that car. And they didn't, which is freaking crazy. All of this stuff. And there's more. I mean, like, we could do this for hours and hours, and every single hour I could give you 10 new things of how bad it is. The stuff they allege he bought was not in the order of anybody who's ever bought a pipe bomb making stuff. In fact, all the stuff that he had on his list, I've got in my garage, all of it. I've got 9 volts. I've got connectors for 9 volts with 2 little, black and red wires coming out of it. I've got end caps. I've got galvanized pipe. I probably have enough chemicals in general between the stuff my wife is doing, charcoal and so on, that she's doing on her garden. This is like, it doesn't make any sense. And apparently he spaced out his purchases so far that he was really mad about the 2020 election, which is why he dropped the pipe bombs. But he was buying the stuff in 2019 before anyone knew what the election results were. I think he was buying stuff in 2018. And then he continued to buy bomb-making stuff after the fact. Okay? They never found the shoes that were supposed to be part of it. Oh, and the last piece of it is Steve Baker's gone down and measured the actual bricks using really, really precise telemetry from the best captured versions of these videos. And Brian Cole Jr.'s foot is at least a 12.5, maybe a 13. And the pipe bomber's foot is a size 9 or a 9.5. So those are like 1.25 inches off. That's actually pretty easy to see on really good video when you land directly on bricks that have a specific measurement. And Steve Baker measured the actual bricks. There's no chance this guy did this. So all of that stuff is crazy. And you start realizing this created major problems. This story about the pipe bomber was something that Joe Kent knew about at the National Counterterrorism Center. It's something that the people at ODNI knew about, which is Tulsi Gabbard's organization. They were working on their own independent investigation into this. And when they did, it caused just an absolute shootstorm across the entire government intelligence community. And that's when you ended up starting getting a lot of crazy things have happened. There's already been someone who's been killed over this, as far as we can tell, an investigator into this story. You're seeing it right there. An investigator that worked over at DHS is dead.
Yeah,
right
so
after he briefed what his theory was.
This morning, this is Emerald Robinson's post, guys, on X. This is from this morning. She says, FBI whistleblowers now claim that FBI officials in the Trump admin applied pressure on Blaze TV to silence or remove Steve Baker, who we've been talking about, over his reporting on the J6 pipe bomber. They also claim that a career federal agent who helped Baker's investigation is now dead. It says huge story. So Kyle, give us a little bit of background into what Steve Baker was doing and how basically this happened.
So this is, I'm trying to get my timeline. Some of this stuff, like, I've probably forgotten more about this case than like most people will ever know about it, unfortunately. But
yeah, but this is why I get it.
So
talk about this stuff.
In December, 2 things happened that were really crazy. They were spinning up. First of all, they didn't have Brian arrested yet. And as they were briefing the theory on how they were going to go about proving in a court of law, so that's a law enforcement agency. This is a DHS type thing, DHS, Department of Homeland Security. They have law enforcement entities underneath them, and I don't know the specifics whether this guy was at Homeland Security or something else like that. But you guys can actually find the sort of teased out version of this particular bit, and there's going to be a lot more of it. My buddy Baker he got fired by the Blaze. Okay, there were phone calls coming in from Kash Patel to Glenn Beck, allegedly, I'll say, because I wasn't on the phone calls, but I have it on pretty good authority. That's the case. The calls were that you have to fire Steve Baker before they released the story about Charlie Kirk. The pressure was very, very aggressive against the Blaze. The Blaze ended up publishing their story after significant, kind of like butt pain of going through legal reviews and editorial reviews and making sure they were like, dotting all their I's, crossing all their T's, that all the gate analysis they had was shored up and that substantiated, and they felt they could, win a defamation suit and all that. And then the only reason why the Blaze ran away scared is because the FBI actually arrested somebody else, and they're building a case in public, in a criminal case, which is terrible. It's just a terrible case. I would not want to be the investigator on that. I've had people from the FBI, unrelated to it and related to it, call me up and say that this is an awful case. People who believe in the FBI do not believe in the Brian Cole Jr. case. And it makes it casts a huge amount of doubt on everything they're doing. And so all of this stuff is wild. But as they're doing this sort of investigative plan coming out of ODNI, there are people in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, that's Tulsi Gabbard's office, that were getting briefed up on, here's how we want to go about investigating this from the DHS end, not the FBI, because they didn't trust them. This guy ends up dead in a very, very peculiar circumstance. I know about it, but I'm not really, it's not really my story to tell right now. So I'm not hiding it from you guys. It will be told. It will be told over at my buddy's website. He's going to be independently producing now because got fired by Blaze. He started this thing that's called Veritas Regnat, REGNAT, Veritas Regnat. So check that out.
This is Steve Baker. This is Steve Baker, Kyle. Okay. Steve Baker. And guys, I'll find that website and I'll get it in the show notes for today's video. Definitely
follow him, support him if you guys are interested. If you're a member of the Blaze or you support Glenn Beck's Torch and you want to drop your subscription and support Baker, you're going to be doing the right thing. So I'll just make that. I'll make that shameless plug for both my friend, but also someone who's really, really investigative. He's really doing the real work on this. And so then the last piece is, and I think this is probably the craziest, is like just a couple days after that guy ended up dead, Baker ended up in the hospital with a previously undiagnosed and no history in the family and no history. He's in his 60s. He's like 60 something years old. Never had a problem before. He's a not obese guy. He's fit and he moves around. He's super active. And apparently he had congestive heart failure out of nowhere that almost killed him. And so whether or not he was hit with something, whether he was just overworked and overstressed, which is a possibility, we have to realize that that's a possibility. But there's also the possibility that somebody was playing in. And the other crazy thing is, and we haven't even talked about this, nor do we have time, but like he was doing investigative work on directed energy weapons that were being used on January the 6th, things that he believes that were in play coming from military units, another sort of crazy thing, people who acted ways that were totally inappropriate, their testimony. I think he's actually seen the picture from what he showed me. I mean, I may or may not have some video of this, so in case somebody tries to off Steve Baker, but we kind of can show people what the device looked like because I think we can see the person who's actually using it. So there's crazy things that went on January 6th, and the people that are working behind the scenes to cover this up, I don't think all of them are bad actors. And I think that's what people don't understand. A cover up doesn't mean like you got read in on the whole plan and now you got to hide it. It gets like, hey man, you're an FBI agent, go out there and do this. By the way, help substantiate this case. Will you do, search warrant over at this place? Will you go and do some video analysis on this thing? Will you run some numbers on the credit card receipts and so on? So you could be part of the investigation. You could be part of the cover up and you have no complicity in it. In the same way that you could be part of dropping off a freaking bomb and not knowing that it was a problem because someone told you it was a training device.
Yeah, that kind of
it's siloed.
Your insight, that siloing method that you mentioned, right? That you mentioned earlier, and you just mentioned right there, and just the way that they can kind of shield people away from the whole overall bigger picture. I think it provides some insight into ultimately how the deep state operates. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the deep state that's trying to push a certain agenda. They're trying to get certain things done, and they're operating in this covert manner, but they're basically just using different pawns to move them around to different places. And those pawns may not know exactly what they're doing with regard to the bigger overall picture. But I guess that's like where the frustrating thing is like ultimately then who does? Like who who is moving the chess pieces ultimately is kind of what I'm
Well, we
wondering
all
here.
think that there's like some some nefarious group that's doing that there's some central node. My longtime theory, and this is just, two guys trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I say they just as much as anybody else does. So if you're out in the chat and you're like, they did it. It's like, yeah, I say the same thing to my wife. Like I'm a regular guy. I don't have deep access to some knowledge. I can do very good analysis from the information that's in front of me. And I'm a pretty capable thinker. And I have a really good memory. Those are kind of my powers. Super memory. I can talk really fast. I can string thoughts together in a way that conveys information to people. But like, I didn't set out to be a podcast guy. Like if you'd asked me what I wanted to do, I would have still been doing FBI stuff. I just didn't have a choice. It turned out they started doing evil things. I don't know who they is. I don't know who's pulling the strings. I don't know if it's some shadowy cabal of people, if there's one, uber baddie that's up there. And more likely than not, for me, based on just kind of the assessment, I think it's a lot of people that are working in their own self-interest. And this is the one thing that makes me think this. I don't know anybody that thinks they're the bad guy in their own story. I don't know a single person. I mean, you got a couple of friends that are kind of like they're super depressed or whatever. They've decided they're the bad guy and they're the reason everything's bad, but they're just like, that's a hormone imbalance.
Right.
Rarely do you see people doing truly evil stuff that think that they're the bad guy.
Yeah,
they're doing
think they're on the wrong side of history, right? They think
everybody thinks they're the good guy.
Yep.
Listen, everybody who did anything evil in all of history probably thought they were the good guy. They had a good reason for it. It made sense. They were defending their family. It was their paycheck and their pension. Great example. I lost my job in New Mexico. My boss was the best FBI boss I'd ever had, bar none. He was awesome. He's a really good guy. He was such a good guy. When I talked to him on the phone a few times, when I was thinking about moving out there, I moved into his neighborhood so he would be like less than half a mile away from me. I was like, I like you. I like what you're about. Like, I'm going to come live in the same area you live in. That seems smart. So I bought a house very close to my boss, walking distance. Okay. Best boss I ever had. When I came in and told him, not only am I not getting this COVID shot, which was like one of my original stands. I was like, that's not negotiable, by the way. Like, that's a religious belief. It's a pro-life thing. It's not happening. I won't take it. So do whatever you want. But I said, additionally, I'm not going to discriminate against myself. Okay. I'm not going to take a nasal swab every 72 hours for a disease that I don't have symptoms of. Right. I didn't mention it in my bio, but I was a paramedic for over a decade. I held national credentials in that. I worked in hospitals. I've done a bunch of probably thousands of nasal swabs during flu season. I mean, that's what I did. And I was like, dude, I'm not doing a nasal swab for a disease I don't have just to make you guys feel better because I'm a Christian. That's not happening. Like, zero chance of that. So no to that. I'm not going to wear a mask unless everybody wears a mask. I'm not going to swab my nose unless everybody does. My boss takes me aside. He goes, look, dude, you're right. You're totally right. I totally agree with everything you're saying. However, I have alimony to pay because I'm divorced. I've got a mortgage that I've got to pay, and I'm 2 years away from retirement. So my pension is due. That's how this stuff goes down. Yeah. It's like, he wasn't even, I don't even think he was a bad guy still. I still don't think he was a bad guy. I think he was cowardly, but I understand why. So I have that empathy. None of the people that are doing this stuff that are working the Brian Cole Jr. case, they don't think they're the bad guy. Yeah. None of these people set out to be the villain, and they don't think of themselves as the villain. They actually probably think they're saving the country. I bet you Charlie Kirk thinks she's doing things for God and country. If she believes in God, I don't know. She looks kind of like maybe one of the other team. I don't know what the story is. I just looked at her and I've seen some of the stuff. She's done some like diversity things. She did some stuff about like feminism and so on in college, and she's got the haircut. The funniest thing is that she looks like she would be interested in the same sex, whatever that's worth. And one of the wildest moments that people found out as they were being interviewed about their former coworker at the U.S. Capitol Police was they all assumed she was a lesbian.
The biggest lie in those documents is that she has a boyfriend.
Well, she has a boyfriend. She lives with a boyfriend. She's lived with him for a long time. So whatever the hell that means. But by the way, but apparently people that knew them were surprised that either one of them was straight. That's what I've kind of heard behind the scenes, which is funny. I mean, that's just like a human aspect of this whole story. Like, there are people involved. They're regular people. They're not villains. They're not doing that. They're not pinky in the brain trying to capture the world. They're just human beings that are paying their bills, trying to figure out what the right answer is, and they came up with different answers than what you and I might. That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, what would be because ultimately these pipe bombs alleged were placed outside of the RNC and the DNC, correct, on January 5th. So
let's call him what my buddy Steve Friend, he's another former FBI agent. He said they would have been bombs if they were bombs.
Sure.
That's my favorite.
whatever they were, right? Yeah. Whatever these items were, they were placed outside the RNC and the DNC. For what purpose, ultimately? So what would be the motive? Like, what's the explanation there as far as motive goes?
So Daniel Bongino told us what he thought his answer was before he became the deputy director. I think he's probably not far off. A couple of reasons you could do it. One, a sentencing enhancement for anybody that gets jammed up going into the Capitol. That'd be a really good answer, because what they do in the federal system, which is not the same way that you find in the state system, is that if there are crimes that are because or related to your crime, they can consider that during the sentencing, even if they never charged you with them. So a violent action that happens that's part of like a broader thing. And they were alleging, like, remember, it was a vast right-wing conspiracy of people that were going to overthrow the government. It was an insurrection or whatever. And all of those words were basically set up to be able to do really aggressive sentencing for what was essentially trespassing. So here's the other thing, being the Forrest Gump of the FBI in some ways, my surveillance team got sent all over the place. I was in Portland in 2020. I saw the riots there. I was there for 2 weeks in an undercover surveillance role or a low visibility surveillance role. So I saw all the crazy stuff that was going on in Portland. Okay. I came back to DC and I watched all the crazy stuff in DC. I watched them riot outside, just like everybody else. I watched them on like YouTube live streams. That's when I started following guys like Austin Fleckus and stuff like that. And I think I saw a handful of other guys, probably Elijah Schaffer at the time too. Like all the people that were running around doing the riot chasing, I watched them just like you guys did. Like they're great open intel. And they drove Trump into the bunker. The next day, I'm out in front of the freaking White House on the north side of the White House, and I'm blocking off protesters and standing there with an FBI body armor and a rifle, and my covert minivan that I was hanging out in with the lights on, telling people they couldn't come up. So I saw what happened when people destroyed stuff in the United States, both in other cities and in Washington, D.C., trespassing, destruction of government property, etc. You know what happened to those people? Freaking nothing. So there was a massively different push by both the FBI, the Justice Department, etc., compared to what they did to J6ers. That doesn't mean that people who punched a cop on J6 like have my sympathy, but at the end of the day, a bunch of people punched cops all throughout 2020 in all over the country, including federal cops and federally deputized officers. And it's like, dude, can we just not have parity? If you're going to give those people probation, could you not give the J6ers probation? And here's one last little thing that most people won't know because you've never prosecuted a case in Washington, D.C. There are two systems there are two types of court in D.C. Just like if you, I don't know, Zach, what state do you live in?
Virginia. I'm right outside of D.C.
Okay. So yeah, I used to live in Burke. I was in Fairfax, Virginia.
I know it well. Yeah.
Yep. So let's say that I do something in Fairfax County. I'm speeding on the parkway, right? And then I also wreck my vehicle and I smash it into some lady's garden. So I do property destruction and whatever. And I'm whatever. So they arrest me. Fairfax County PD comes in and gets me, or Fairfax City, depending on where I am, right? I might go in front of a district attorney in that area. So I'm going to be prosecuted at the state level by some sort of county prosecutor. In DC, it's all federal, right? Like everything's federal. So you've got DC Metro, they're funded by the federal government, FBI funded by federal government, ATF, federal government, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things are federal. So when you're a federal agent in Washington, D.C., you have a choice. And by the way, so do the prosecutors. The same prosecutor's office, which is Janine Pirro right now, the District of Columbia. Yeah. They prosecute either at the superior court level, which is essentially the same as local court. That's going to be your state court, like, Fairfax County. Yeah. Or they do it in the district court. Almost all the J6ers, I think all of the J6ers were actually prosecuted in the district court as federal infractions, when in fact it should have just been stuff about, like these are trespassing charges. Yeah. They should have put them in the superior court. The superior court judge would have looked at him and been like, dude, I've got 9 guys waiting trial that stabbed somebody within the last 48 hours. We're not interested in your trespassing. Give them probation and send them out the door. Right. That's what would have normally happened to J6. Because they pushed it so hard, I think the pipe bombs were a piece of it. And then the secondary idea that Dan Bongino himself floated was that maybe it was an attempt to draw resources away, the bomb squads, the Capitol police officers, away from the Capitol itself to weaken up the actual physical posture of the security at the Capitol so that it would be more easy to overrun it. And then if you've got somebody up there shooting pepper balls in people's faces, there are people that use these tools overseas and embassies and so on. If you want to have a riot, the rule is shoot people in the face with the pepper balls, start shooting tear gas into their chest, make people think that their life is on the line. They'll fight like their life's on the line. And so there is a belief that, and I don't think it's unfounded, that these actions were to basically stir up kind of the rage of the crowd, and they got it. And then they got basically 4 years of hunting these people down. There were 2,000 families and all the people that knew them and all the people that were terrified that couldn't speak. Because they were like, I don't want
the FBI also involved in riling up the crowd, though?
I don't actually think they were. So I've read all the documents on that. And this is not because, look, if I can punch the FBI in the face, it's my favorite thing to do, and I'll do it all day long. Like every day, I've called out as many things that I know they do illegally, immorally, or unethically. But I don't think that they were involved in the riling up. When you read about the people, all the numbers that Kash Patel released, they were all people that responded to the Capitol. And I know people that got the same emails. They were like, show up at the Capitol, blah, blah, blah. So they would drive into work if they weren't there that day. This is the middle of COVID. So they had like limited staffing for some reason. I'm fairly confident, like whatever the 153, that's not undercovers. That doesn't mean they didn't have people who were sources, like assets. There were definitely assets. There's as many as 28 have been admitted. The FBI is not the only people running these games. And this is kind of why I think people get siloed in, and that's how the government gets away with this stuff. This is like analysis again. Chris Wray would be like, yeah, we didn't have any undercovers in the crowd. Well, undercover is a program in the FBI. You have to be certified as an undercover. It's kind of like being in the Army and your job is grenadier, or your job is, like medic. It's like, did you have any soldiers there? And you'd be like, we had no medics. And they'd be like, okay. Well, that's real specific undercovers. You could have had plainclothes FBI guys like I used to do, which would have been normal, by the way. But I don't think they were stirring it up. But what I don't know is what about the other departments that were there? Again, ATF, DEA, Marshal Service. You've got HSI, you've got all the stuff out of Homeland Security. There's a huge amount of things that are completely, they're just not scrutinized. The FBI has rules on how they run undercovers and so on. DHS doesn't have any of those rules. I've been saying it for a couple of years now that they're kind of cowboys. It doesn't mean they did something bad, just means that they could get away with it because they wouldn't be violating policy.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think that it's like just FBI undercovers in the crowd riling people up. I think that the odds are is probably something more specific, that it was other agencies, assets of those agencies, names and source rooms that are protected. That's far more plausible to me than like a bunch of like guys like I used to work with. Because look, at the end of the day, I know a bunch of people in that office, and I think I would have known if people were out there doing it. There were definitely FBI agents that were in that crowd that were favorable to Trump. All of those guys got to talk, by the way. The talk is either you join up with us right now, go get the shot and shut your mouth, or your job is over and we're going to prosecute you. I know several people had that conversation.
I know a number of military members that also had similar conversations that I'm friends with. Some of them are not in the military anymore because they refuse. But it was the same thing. It's like, hey man, like look, we agree with you, but just do it. Just do it. It was almost like the easier decision to make. And I know a lot of men specifically made that decision because of their employment and because it's their job to provide for their families. And it's hard. And I also know, I brought up the example on my channel. My wife's side of the family, my mother-in-law was sick. She had cancer, serious cancer, and the doctors told her that you're not allowed to visit your mom here. You shouldn't go near your mom if you don't get the vaccine. So I consider there was a lot of people that were victims of that specific circumstance. So I mean, as far as you go, I commend you on your courage and your bravery and standing up for that. That's good stuff. You don't come across it very often because it is a very difficult decision to make. And that's, they're attacking Joe Kent for the same thing that you stood for as well, like standing on your principles, standing for your values it's almost like it doesn't matter. Like you burn the bridges. Doesn't matter if I lose my job. Like I'm standing on it. And I respect that for sure.
Well, the people that caved in there, and we'll use the word that other people use, but they were extorted. It wasn't like there was like a free will and everybody got to make a decision.
It's extortion. 100%.
It was 100% extortion.
There's a lot of people that are victims of extortion.
That's it. At the end of the day, I knew what it was going to cost me, and I just have a spouse that like was 100% on board with getting into this battle with me. And so, I lost my job. I lost my pension. I lost my health insurance. I haven't had health insurance since, and I'm not sure I'm going to do it again. That's another story for another time. But like, I think health insurance is a scam. So, and guess what? I had a baby since then. Like, so we have our fourth child was born, and we didn't have health insurance.
We're the same way, man. We pay out of pocket for everything.
Yeah, out of pocket, home birth, baby. Like
we do a Christian health share, which I'm a very big fan of.
It makes sense.
But that's what we do. But yeah, as far as traditional healthcare and health insurance, there's
a reason why those buildings are so big. There's a reason why they have thousands and thousands of employees. It's not because they're giving you the best deal.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
I knew we would lose our house. My kids lost their childhood where they were growing up next to friends and the community that we had there. We had to basically uproot. We lived with my folks. I was 41 years old and I moved in with my parents with 3 kids into a 2-bedroom little space. We lived in 300 and something square feet for 6 months and basically almost broke the relationship with my parents. who were my biggest supporters. And, like they were the only ones talking to us because the other family wasn't talking about COVID. They didn't want to deal with us. And we ended up, taking a total leap. And then I'm not employable in law enforcement. They stole my career. Like I cannot go back and do law enforcement after what I do now. Like I talk to you, there's thousands of hours of me doing this. Like I'm not hireable for a law enforcement agency because I say things that are uncomfortable for people. And I point out problems in government, which I'm probably closer to like Christian libertarianism. I just don't want government around me.
Yeah.
I think it's the worst solution to every problem, including when it's maybe the only one. And law enforcement is one of those examples. Like it's still a crappy solution, but it may be the only way you can do that in any kind of fair way, but it still is terrible. It's still serving itself and not you.
Yeah.
So we saw during COVID, for whatever it's worth, a bunch of people who claimed that they would give their life for you and they wouldn't even lose their job for you.
Yep.
I want people to just consider that stuff.
Yep.
So, end of the day, that doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me a regular guy. There's a lot of regular guys that did the same exact thing. I'm just really vocal about it. And I don't want to forget. Like, I don't want people to forget that we had an opportunity and we sorted out the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And especially people in positions of authority that should have said, hey, this isn't right. I'm not going to enforce that. Absolutely not.
Right.
Some people did. Some people did the right thing. Some of those people went along with what goes on in J6. That's how this stuff happens. And that's the long answer to, who's they? I think they is all of us. It just depends on whether or not you were put to a decision for all your chips and whether or not you drew a red line before you got that question. Because some of us, we already knew where the line was. The minute you come to me, it's like, hey, not happening, buddy. Now what? Joke's on you.
Well, and I think that's such an important value and lesson that everybody who's going to get themselves involved in, you want to say, working for government or some position of political leadership, if you don't have all of your values in order and you don't know what you're going to do when that's presented to you, that's how all of these guys get snatched up. And that's how we end up where we are. I mean, it's just because these guys, again, they get in there, they see what power can do. This is how power corrupts. I mean, ultimately, what you described there is exactly how power corrupts. And it's just simply individuals who are not firm on their values. And when it comes down to it again, man, I'll just get back to it. It's the Christian faith. Like if you're willing to ultimately just, if you have to die for the faith, then nothing else ultimately matters. And that gives you the right perspective to discern all of these things of the world, which so many people are just unable to do because they don't have that grounding, is what it comes down to.
I haven't brought it up in a while. Every time I go back in sort of the origin story, I remember it. But the concept of white and red martyrdom should be familiar to people that are Christian. And if you've never heard of it, just do a quick read on it. It's a fascinating topic. But essentially, white martyrdom means you give up things in this world that are comforts, that make your life better. Job, family, connections, friends, etc. Material wealth. That's white martyrdom, and you may have to do that and sacrifice it for a faith position. Red martyrdom means you usually lose your head and you're dead. And so that happens too. And we haven't seen a lot of people called to red martyrdom, but a lot of people are called to white martyrdom recently. And I think when you see it, even this guy in the NBA the other day who was out there and he was just like, I'm not going to get behind this whole story that you guys are on. I'm not a Pride Month guy. It's not for me.
Yeah.
And you lose your job and your NBA contract, and maybe his wife says he's crazy and tries to get him, it's like, that's white martyrdom. That's what it looks like. And you should recognize it.
I like that term. I think that's good. I think because that's ultimately, I think that's what most of us are called to, right? It's a rare circumstance where we're called to red martyrdom, but white martyrdom is what all of us are called to. Almost every day, ultimately, is what it comes down to.
Honestly, you can find an example. If you've thought about it, if you've already thought out the answer, and I think some people have done this, you'll find that somebody will come to you and say something that disparages your Christian faith. Yeah. They'll say something that's blasphemous. And you can do one of two things. You can ignore it, which a lot of people do. That's the most convenient thing to do for people that want to not make waves in social circles. Or you could say, I really disagree with that. And if you ever wanted to talk about it seriously, I know that was just kind of a joke, but if you ever want to talk about it, I'd love to. It's such an easy thing to do. You won't even have a white martyrdom moment there. You could also stand up and start wielding the sword and shield of Christ. And that could be kind of interesting. You could go on a crusade. I don't always recommend that, but yeah, most of us have a white martyrdom moment every day if you looked for it, if you are open-minded enough, and if you've already set that red line. Like you can't back me beyond this line. This is my limit. I've already hit it. And for those of us who lived through 2020, I hope a lot of you know where your limit is, because you're going to get tested again in some other way. I don't know what it will be. It won't be COVID, but it's coming.
For sure. Yep. Kyle, what are you at on time? I mean, I pretty much have a hard stop at 4:30. What are you looking at here? I know we haven't.
This is what I do. I'm here to chat. Yeah, I'll go down and deal with my kiddos in a few minutes. This is my full-time gig. I talk to people, and I'm like 85% of my time is unpaid government transparency activist.
Can you go until 4:30? I mean, maybe what we can do is we can go to 4:30 and we can maybe cover some of this Joe Kent foreign involvement in Charlie Kirk real quick.
Yeah, let's do
and
it.
then maybe we can get to just the little bit of super chats that we have, and then we can call it. Maybe,
Yeah, fire away. I'm open for this. The next thing I have is at 7:00 my time, so I got time.
All right, I'll skip the Gary Melton clip. Actually, you know what? It's not long. Let me just bring it up, and because I think it's a good piece of context to get us into the Joe Kent perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to hear your perspective on it, because again, to remind everybody, as I said at the outset, this is where I first came across Kyle when he was on with Gary Melton. It was early on in the Charlie Kirk investigation. It was early October 2025 when I don't believe it anymore, and I've said as much to Gary's face. We had a 3-hour conversation about it. He knows that we disagree, so nothing that I'm saying here I didn't say to Gary's face. We're not talking behind his back or anything. But this is when I was paying attention to a lot that he was covering with regard to the Charlie Kirk assassination case. Excuse me. Especially discerning whether or not Charlie had body armor on, evaluating the different shot angles and ballistics, etc. So anyway, he had Kyle on around this time, and they started talking and getting into potential foreign involvement, or I'm sorry, investigation into a conspiracy. So I want to bring up that clip because I actually clipped this and I covered it on my show in early October after the fact. So let's pull this up and take a listen.
I think if there was a conspiracy, it was executed online. Someone went in these online rooms to find someone to conspire with, not an on-site. I agree with this. Look, I think there is zero chance that his other people that he knew didn't know about this, including his furry transvestite boyfriend. I also think there is a really good chance that people in his Discord chat and some of these other online accounts and people within his inner circle, I think this was almost kind of a, I don't know. I think he was bragging about this probably within his inner circle, or at least planning about it. I think it was kind of a sense of bravado, and that's, again, speculation. I also think there's a good chance that there could have been more things involved than just letting them know. But we're going to find out, I think. They're definitely they're exploiting all his electronics and figuring out what's going on with that.
Let me just jump in a little taste.
Yeah, please.
I've had some sourcing already kind of let me know that this is the case. There is a conspiracy, or at least there's a investigation into a conspiracy, and the conspiracy is 100% exactly what you said, and it's online. There's some additional things that we're going to find out, I think, in the next couple of days. Some of the stuff I'm not at liberty to talk about because it's not my story, but I've been read up in them, and sourcing is pretty credible. A lot of these online platforms, and I'm going to be very broad because, again, I don't want to scoop anybody's story that's been talking to me, but Discord, Reddit, Facebook, even X, to a lesser degree, there is infiltration, and there is infiltration of sophisticated AI capabilities and botnets that are indistinguishable from human interactions, will carry on for years, and they're operated by nation state level actors, and they are not operated by like some a-hole or some Fed that's trying to jam up a case. Yep. That story has come out, by the way. A couple of these stories have come out.
So elaborate on what you're talking about there.
So essentially, we had some information released to the public. If people have been following the news, it was kind of a little blip for a little while. The United States Secret Service had a high-level executive inside the Secret Service get swatted, which resulted in U.S. Secret Service running down the swatting addresses being used and the whatever the botnet that was sourcing and sort of outsourcing the phone call. And that led them to some sophisticated botnet technologies. There were 5 different locations that were found outside of New York City. The story that people will find in the headlines was that botnets and SIM farm servers were being set up with 100,000 plus SIM cards, and they were able to basically take down the communication systems of New York. They could take down the emergency management systems there. They can basically flood calls in and decapitate the ability to be able to take in 911 calls and so on and so forth, calls for service. So those are basically, everyone agrees that they're being run by China. And as someone who worked counterintelligence against Chinese for about 2 years, I'm certainly not an expert on that, and I never would claim to be, but I have a familiarity with it that's probably beyond the average public person. And the Chinese benefit from general chaos in the United States, general discord. They benefit from party, tribal alliances. You know, if there are people that are mad about certain things, then if you play them against each other, a united American front is not in the interest of China, generally speaking. And so a lot of what they do is sort of just like causing problems. They're in Greek mythology, it's the apple of discord. You remember that story? Who is it? Is it Hera that comes in and throw? No, it's not. It's somebody else that
I'm
didn't
not
get
well
invited.
versed in Greek mythology.
Oh, man, I used to know the story really, really well. But basically,
other than watching Percy Jackson with my kids, that's pretty much my only experience with that. But.
There's a golden apple that was written to the fairest, and it was thrown in the middle of a wedding, and it's a wedding, and all the great goddesses. So the goddess of the hearth, and the goddess of love, and the goddess of the hunt. So Artemis and Venus, and or whatever, Artemis, Venus. Whatever. I'm mixing their Roman and their Greek names. They all fight over it. And so it causes discord. Mm-hmm. And so having a discussion that is not centralized on America's the good actor, we're the good guys, like getting people riled up for any reason and being at each other's throats, it benefits the Chinese. They have very, very long-term plans, and some of them are just destabilize and just be almost like internet shit posters, if people were going to use that term. I mean, they do some of that. Yeah. So having sophisticated bot actors that are siloed, that are able to operate under a distinct personality. Law enforcement uses this right now. They'll use them to trap people that are child sex traffickers. They will use them to trap people that are involved in illicit interstate commerce of narcotics or guns or whatever else. They'll use them for people that are involved in what they call hate groups, which I think is really, really problematic. I've got a major problem with quote unquote hate crimes. I despise them. I don't think there's any love crimes really. So like, I think all crimes, they don't need a special modifier. And it ends up carving out special categories of people that get extra scrutiny. And I think that's really problematic in America. But we use those tools like law enforcement agencies currently. Like, for example, in Phoenix right now, there's a $350,000 or a $380,000 contract for these types of AI tools that go out and play a role. And they've got multiple different social media profiles. So this is not just like, oh, I just talked to this chat handle. It's at Kyle Seraphin. It's at Kyle Seraphin everywhere. So you'll find me on Instagram. You'll find me on, like on Reddit. You find me on Discord, whatever. I use the same handle. That's what these bots do. So they create a personality that is more broad than just like some little sock puppet. And they can do all kinds of wild stuff with that. Now imagine you have 10 different sock puppets. They're all operating with nominal backstopping. And they're all moving towards one goal. One of them is your friendly. The other one is the love interest. One of them is like your confidant with the bad ideas that sees all the worst things. And they're all the same computer. And so this is the danger that people have, is that you don't know on the other end of the computer. This is the upside of being in my 40s. Like, I remember an analog life. I remember having to call people up on the phone or go knock on their door to go see them. Yeah. We all have digital friends now that we've probably never even met. Yeah. I have friends that theoretically a very sophisticated AI could create the video interface, and I wouldn't know. I don't think that's quite there yet. But the reality of your online interactions that you have regularly on X or on your chat groups or whatever else, like, they can be infiltrated, and they can be infiltrated by sophisticated bot actors that are running very complex AI with an infinite amount of patience that can radicalize people towards a maybe not really logical goal. Like, what would be the logical goal of sowing dissent between people who are interested in, like, let's say, a transgender ideology, and Charlie Kirk, who seems to be a pretty good example of like Christian evangelism in the political space? It's not a logical jump that would help Chinese people or the Chinese government, but chaos is chaos, and scaring people and causing people to have, like, our generation never had political assassinations. The closest thing we had was Reagan, and he lived. Nobody's been shot with a high-powered rifle in public ever, in the last 50 or 60 years. It's just not part of my generation, your generation. Most of the people in your chat don't remember that unless they're quite a bit older. It's just not a thing.
See, and I think where my mind goes, and this is just having conversations with people who work in, I would just say, various agencies in government. This idea of covert influence, though, and how these different, nation state actors, as you had mentioned there in that clip, would utilize these different platforms to achieve certain objectives. And I go back to like what we found, USAID doing that Doge uncovered, for example. We found that we were actually executing covert influence campaigns in certain countries to basically get our way. So, when
well, here's even crazier. Do you know that the unit that Joe Kent came out of used to do exactly that?
Yes, that's the CIA paramilitary
It's more than that.
group
He
that
actually
he was in.
So he came out of the Ranger Battalion, went into Special Forces. So that's what people call the Green Berets. And then from there, he moved into what's called a Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. And there's only a couple of them. Delta Force, CAG, whatever people call it today. That's one of them. That's the kinetic sort of direct action wing. And they do some other stuff like some long-term surveillance. But there was this entity that was created to support them. It was literally called the Intelligence Support Activity. That's what it used to be called, ISA. Then it became known as the Activity. It's generally called things like Task Force Orange, and they've evolved into their own special mission unit, Task Force Orange, for the orange, the idea of a color revolution. And so Joe Kent was a sophisticated, not just operator capable of doing, kinetic direct action or, long-term infill or whatever, but these guys do the essentially like what you think Jason Bourne does.
Yeah.
And when he evolved into a paramilitary officer, it's TFO is like super studs. I don't know what languages he speaks, but it's not one language. I can guarantee that. There's no information about what languages he speaks, but I bet he speaks several. And so these guys go long-term solo mission stuff, doing really the most scary, dangerous thing that's out there. And that's turning countries on themselves with just a very minimal footprint, maybe 1, 2, 3 operators operating independently for months. So that's what Joe Kent used to do before he became a director level guy who had access to all the intel in the intel community. And so anyway, when you know that we're doing those things, and we are 100% doing those. Actually, I just saw a thing. I don't know if you saw this, but I did this. I covered it on my show this morning. There's a guy named Jordan Sachtel. He is a kind of, I guess he's a Jewish type activist. He publishes the Dossier. I don't know what the hell that is, but he's out of Florida. And he was caught on a hidden camera talking about moving information and basically laundering it into Facebook pages and into different sort of community groups for a group that's called the Israel Project, TIP. And so they nominally will recognize that they're part of TIP, which they don't ever define what it is.
Was this like an undercover video that was released of him talking about this stuff? Yeah. Okay. I did come across that this morning.
These are social media influence operations. They're real world influence operations. This is an intelligence type tactic to be able to launder information in. I give you 80% of the stuff you want to know about feminism and about gardening and about homesteading. And also like, here's these people that are in a kibbutz that are doing it in Israel. And aren't they awesome too? They're just like you. And so you can move information, you can move people to have positive ideas by very, very soft touches. And so this kind of thing it's very common, and doing it online is even easier because you have unlimited resources. I mean, you can run a machine that has how many personalities could be there? All of them. You literally could be in a chat group by yourself where you're the only one in there that's a human being, and it's all competing AIs that are all working towards one goal, and they're manipulating you from multiple angles. Right. That's the scariest thing ever, by the way.
I'll ask you one question here, because we talked a lot about, like in the pipe bomber case, for example, we talk about this siloing, and we talk about maybe somebody at a higher level, kind of moving the pawns around or pulling the strings to achieve a certain agenda, etc. I mean, what would your response be to this siloing happening to someone like a Tyler Robinson, for example, in the Charlie Kirk case, to be like, hey, like you're going to do these, you're going to make this drop, you're going to do this, you're going to walk through this area, and that's going to be that, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think as far as that thought process and that theory?
So I'm open to it. I don't have any skin in the game one way or another. So I don't know what the answer is, and I haven't spent all my time invested in it. So like that was not my thing. I was in the middle at that time when that all came out. Like I was in the middle of discrediting the FBI director and pointing out that he had people that had worked against, Donald Trump that were flying the FBI director's private jet, and he didn't even know who his own employees were. So I was deep into that game when Charlie Kirk was shot. I was horrified by the shooting of it. It doesn't affect me nearly as much. I didn't know him. I met him like 1 or 2 times at a Turning Point event, and it was seconds. I mean, I just no relationship whatsoever. As a father, it's awful to watch somebody lose, their father, knowing that he's got young kids. So all that stuff's weird. I thought his wife's behavior was not normal. That was really obvious to me. But also, I think she was not normal beforehand, and I didn't understand how a guy that's a devout Christian marries a pageant girl. So like all that's really weird to me too. So look, I mean, like I'm very middle of the road when it comes to, I just don't feel strongly one way or another. Is it possible that Tyler Robinson was siloed into a patsy role? 100% it's possible. I haven't looked at enough of it, and I'm not invested enough because my attention span is limited, and I recognize it. I talked to people that were involved in that investigation early on, and I didn't get any indication that they were running it. the issue that I find with the conspiracy part of it, and again, I'm open to it. Like, just show me the evidence. I'm a skeptic, but show me the evidence, and I'm happy to see it. The guys that I knew that were doing interviews in Salt Lake that came out of there and then went into Utah or in Provo or whatever, and were actually interviewing subjects and doing the part on the FBI. They were super credible, really, really reliable human beings. They would be whistleblowers if the opportunity came up. It just hasn't come up. They called out a lot of malfeasance that was actually on the PR and kind of the structuring of how the FBI got involved. And I think there was malfeasance there. I also think that you got a real problem with the director was trying to get a PR win. In the meantime, he was in the middle of a scandal. So he was desperate to get this win. And so that's why he was announcing in advance, oh, we got the guy, but it was the wrong guy. I even know somebody that was involved in an interview at that exact moment when he was claiming this on Twitter. So they were trying to litigate this stuff on Twitter, which is a terrible idea for a real law enforcement case.
Yeah, they got a lot wrong in those initial press conferences.
Oh, like tons of it. And I watched all the bad information come in with the good information. Look, I've seen enough of the sort of people developing independent theories, from the midgets in the trapdoors to the exploding microphones. I don't know about body armor. It's still plausible to me. I haven't seen enough video that dissuades me of it, but it doesn't mean it did or didn't happen. What I also know is that we haven't had the preliminary hearing yet. And so maybe my biggest sort of cautionary tale against this being a dramatic conspiracy is that Tyler Robinson is still alive. That's probably the biggest thing. I've got friends that worked in the intel community that did things like what Joe Kent's units used to do, that spent time overseas in what they call find, fix, finish, operations. They find you, they fix your location, and then they finish you. And what did my buddy say the other day? He said loose ends get cut off. They don't get tied off, they get cut off. And so when someone's a liability to a plan and they can give away information that you don't want them to, that it's much easier for them to die in a good way. Suicide, they can find themselves on the wrong end of somebody's shiv. They can have an accident in transport. There's a medical overdose, like take your pick. A sickness, sepsis, whatever, injected with something. So there's a lot of ways you can go wrong. That's the biggest reason why I would be like, it leans towards not the entirety of the government narrative, but I think there's probably more truth than not. But I'm really excited about seeing them do a preliminary hearing, because what we're seeing then is whether or not there's even probable cause to believe Tyler Robinson did it. And so I don't have a strong answer on that. I do have a strong answer on the case that I'm deep in. I don't on this one. It's just, I'm not emotionally connected to it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting and what I can do here is I'm just going to bring up the Joe Kent conversation with Tucker Carlson, this quick clip here, so you can comment on that, because I think it falls maybe a little bit more within your area of expertise. I would just say it's going to be very interesting to hear what happens if if and when Tyler Robinson's parents get on the stand, because there's a lot in the charging documents that say he confessed, that say that they think that he did it, that they identified him, which you have reports that apparently that's not true. So that'll be very interesting. So I guess we'll let some time go by, and then we'll see what happens.
Your chat says you look like you lost your friend when we were talking about this. We talked about this before we got on air, for whatever it's worth, people. And it's like, I don't feel really strongly about it. This is just not the thing that I've put my time into. I know a lot of people are very invested in this, and I would caution you to, if you are, just zoom out a little bit, just take the personality out of it and just see, okay, how do the facts hit? And I'm happy to find out that some weird, crazy thing happened. And I'm happy to find out that the narrative lines up with reality. It won't affect me either way, but I do agree with what Joe Kent's saying. I do think there's more to this story. I just don't necessarily think it's what everyone thinks it is.
Let's bring that up.
So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis, and then he's suddenly publicly assassinated, and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that. It's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
No, I don't think you are.
because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public, that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran. And we knew at the end of the 12-day war, at the end of Midnight Hammer, that the Israelis were going to come back and ask us to go back to war again.
Right.
So we have a lot of data points between Butler, the assassination attempts against President Trump, the breaches of his security, what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Can I just ask you to pause on the Charlie Kirk because it upsets me to
me too.
hear what you're saying, to be reminded that he was murdered, but also to hear you confirm what was reported in the media several months ago, that your office had been blocked from investigating his murder. That does not make sense to me. I don't understand why you would ever turn down help in an investigation from a U.S. agency with a lot of experience in gathering intelligence on things. That's your job.
The FBI will say, and the DOJ will say, that because it's an ongoing case, it's a Utah State case, that back off, they've got it. They've got a smoking case. They've got the fingerprints on the gun, and they've got the kid.
But the FBI was involved in the case.
The FBI was involved. The FBI's basically said that they're deferring to Utah because it's now a state
but
case.
they've established a precedent for federal investigation of this crime.
Yeah, and the National Counterterrorism Center's mandate is to investigate any foreign ties, to see if there's potentially any foreign ties. If we don't find any foreign ties, we back off. What I'm saying, without getting into too much detail, is there was more for us to investigate.
You believe there was reason to investigate foreign ties to Charlie Kirk's murder and were told by the FBI, DOJ?
FBI and DOJ, yeah.
No, you're not allowed to investigate that.
Stop. It's done. They basically cut off our access to be able to get into that information. And look, I didn't even say necessarily that I believe there's 100% foreign ties. There were data points that we needed to investigate. I mean, I think anybody who's even looked at any kind of police investigation, you get 100 leads, you run them down, and 99 don't mean anything. We still had a lot more leads to run down that pertained to some kind of a foreign nexus that we were stopped from investigating. And
that just strikes me as inconceivable that could happen.
Yeah, so I guess what I'll say in there, and then I'll let you give your take on that, is that I think one of the important things to note is that Joe Kent's role as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and it's similar to the role of Tulsi Gabbard, is to actually gather and analyze the intelligence, then pass it on to the investigative authorities like the FBI. And what was unique about this circumstance is that basically Joe Kent, what he's saying there is that they had leads that they were recommending, I guess, that the FBI pursue, which Kash Patel or whoever said that they were not going to do. The argument on the FBI side is that those leads were BS. Joe Kent obviously disagrees with that assessment. And I think what's interesting about this is like what caused the whole blow up between Joe Kent and Kash Patel. And I hear a lot of people say this, like Joe Kent wasn't actually involved in the investigation. And that's actually not true. Joe Kent was actually given access to the investigation. And then when Kash Patel found out about that, he was pissed off, cut off his access. And that's what caused kind of the whole public feud to blow up. So that's actually the truth of what happened. And I'm curious to your thoughts as to what Kent said there.
That is the truth. Yeah, the truth is that the National Counterterrorism Center can pursue foreign entities, nation state or otherwise, that are involved in terroristic activity in order to give a complete intel picture, which they would do. What you saw, and again, this is the broader context that I had some role in because I was in the business of exposing how the FBI still had employed all the people that were problematic. This is before Arctic Frost was revealed. This is before they'd fired. At the end of the day, I think I've got like 40 scalps on my wall of people that worked for the FBI. I exposed who they were, and then they were terminated. Some of them, most of them probably shouldn't have been terminated by the time they did. All the people that knelt for for BLM in 2020 all got fired. And it was a project of mine to identify who they were, but you can't fire a dog. I mean, it's kind of like smacking a dog in the face for peeing in the house a week ago. It's like the dog doesn't know what's going on at that point. So yeah, we were doing that to the FBI. We, being me and the other guys that were in the FBI that are out and have been whistleblowers and have been very, very aggressively critical of the previous FBI and the current FBI because they're the same. 99.9% of the same people work there. So they didn't change the FBI. They just changed the director and one other guy. And that other guy wasn't very good. And Kash Patel's not very good either. What you saw with Joe Kent was a pissing match. It's a classic governmental senior executive, director versus director. It's a turf dispute.
Mhm.
And so Joe Kent was saying, we have a nexus, is what we would use for the term, to get in there and investigate and look into this thing. And I don't think Joe Kent necessarily believes that it was Israel per se. That's not relevant, although Israel is a very capable cyber actor. There are a few cyber actors in the world that are really good, and China's one of them, and Russia's one of them. You've got the Iranians are pretty capable, and you have Israel.
And in all fairness to Kent,
And
he
so are we,
straight up
obviously.
said, because he was accused basically of anti-Semitism for talking to Tucker Carlson about this. In all fairness to Joe Kent, he did not say that he believed that it was Israel specifically.
100%.
He said that there were he didn't name one single country.
No. And in this case, I think China is probably the more likely actor in this case. But for whatever it's worth, Joe Kent probably has, Joe Kent's the same age as me. We have similar life, experience for the years that we've seen what's been going on. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, like my thoughts on Israel, it would have been irrelevant. I have no thoughts on Israel. Today, people tell me I can't have a thought that's negative about it. And that makes me think like the opposite, because I'm a contrarian. So if you're like, hey man, you can't, like somebody told me the other day, I was like, hey, I don't really like the idea that our country decided to go to another war, which by the way, I enlisted in the last one. Okay. If my country is going to go to war because the Secretary of State said we were worried that Israel was going to be attacked and that somehow had something to do with us, I was like, well, why don't we just pull all of our people back? Like, that's the right answer to me. And then that makes you an anti-Semite. It's I get blasted with that left and right. I have this thing in my bio on Twitter, which people will see, and it's the concept. You'll get a kick out of it, actually, probably. It's called bacon cheeseburger nationalism. It's almost like a backdoor to Christian nationalism, okay? But at the end of the day, bacon cheeseburger nationalism is a secular version of that that's accessible to people who have Christian values, even if they don't know it, which is basically most of America.
Mm-hmm.
My deal is this. If I offer you a burger at a backyard barbecue and you want cheese on it, that's step one. And if I said, hey, can I give you some bacon on there too? And your answer is like, is it really crispy? And it's like, yeah, it's crispy. And they're like, cool. Like, put the bacon on there. Like, we probably can align on 85% of the things in the world that matter, because you're not a dietary restricted vegan, right? So you're probably, if you're vegans, you're probably not my people. You're not a Hindu who doesn't eat beef. You're not Jewish and you're not Muslim. Those are practicing faith versions of that. I have friends who are Jewish that eat bacon. Like, they're not a problem. Like, they could be bacon cheeseburger nationalists all day long. Right. And it's super easy to have this conversation with people. Do you want a burger? If you have a choice of bacon and there's no upcharge, do you want the bacon? If the answer is yes, like, you're my people. Like, it's pretty much it. Like, it's a super easy backdoor way to do it, to find out what we're talking about.
Yeah. Did you get the COVID vaccine in there? And then you're
yeah, then we'll know a little bit more about you too. Yeah. Like, are you a follower or are you not a follower? Are you an independent thinker or not? But fine. End of the day, it's super easy to be able to suss out who is and who is not. Kind of like what my tribe looks like in America. My tribe is all different colors. I serve with dudes who are absolute studs. They are the most right-wing, lunatic fringe, gun owner, homeschooling, no vaccine, everything. Like, all that stuff, which used to be a left-wing position, by the way. It's kind of funny. But like, my buddies of every skin color and probably theoretically, they're all basically either Christian or they're non-religious and they have Christian values. Those are my people. I've never had anyone tell me that I had to have an opinion about Israel until like maybe the last 16 or 12 months. And now my opinion is like, screw you. Stop telling me I have to have an opinion. 100%. Stop conflating something.
But 100%, or stop treating me, or stop basically threatening my rights, especially threatening to censor me or calling me a hateful, evil person because I don't agree with you. I mean, that's been my biggest thing the entire time, and that's what drives me the most insane about it. And it's
just driven you're irrelevant. Like, look at the numbers in America. 1970, 90+% of this country was Christian. Today, it's like 60%. That's a really big problem. We're probably a nation under judgment because of that. But 2.4% of this country, the voting bloc that's going to represent people that get a decision, are Jewish, like that practice the religion or identify as Jewish, whatever the hell that is, because apparently it's a race and a religion. It's 1.5% for Hindus, 1.5% give or take for Muslims. So to tell me that we're being invaded and overrun by people that represent like 5% of our population, that's crazy. And by the way, you should have about 5% of the population representation. You shouldn't have 30%. You shouldn't have a hugely outsized representation in Congress. And you shouldn't have a huge representation in my life, because I just don't care. Just stay out of my business. I shouldn't have conversations with regular people where somebody has to quietly mention, what's going on here. And you're like, crap. How is it so many of these connections? I never had an opinion. I still don't have like a strong emotional feeling about it, but I hate that someone tells me that I have to feel a certain way because I grew up in like an era when punk rock was cool. If you tell me one thing, I want to do the other, even though I'm in my 40s. If you're like, hey, go mow your lawn today, like, screw you, I'm gonna do it on Friday.
Yeah,
like, I'm gonna do whatever I want.
Very similar.
I just don't tell me what to do, jerks.
Yeah.
Like, so
it's a part of why I'm unemployable, why I've always had my own businesses, and it's probably why you and I are sitting here talking today.
It is.
Hey, let's take 2 quick minutes to run through some of these super chats here,
Do it.
and then we'll wrap this up. We got one here. As a woman with Western African roots, I'm amazed at how this white man can't be on time to his own scheduled show. LOL. But you're
Brutal,
a
man.
bad boy. That's right. I'm a bad boy, guys, and that's why. So
Love
we
it.
get it. Zach Pack is ready. I get crap all the time for running fashionably late to my streams. So here we go, guys. I'm just trying to prepare myself.
I used to call that
for you.
CPT in reference to your West African commenter there. Do you know what CPT is?
It's colored people time, right?
Yeah, it's a thing.
That's what people that I've had people use that term in my chats.
My buddies that just happen to have darker skin than me use it as an excuse for showing up late, and I just tell them that's not acceptable.
Oh, I have it too, so that's what I'm going to say. All right,
Yeah, well, you just
all good.
CPT,
I'll
man.
take it. And we got a member here, new member shout out. Thank you. All right. Ironically, Trump was voted for because he was being silenced and treated this way. This administration is now treating us. Free speech is the American dream.
Yeah, either we keep talking or the alternative shows up, and that gets kinetic. Nobody really. I don't want that with little kids, but I guess more than more, we're getting open to it. There's a lot of people that are moving towards the First Amendment might be dead, so we got to defend the other ones.
100%, absolutely. Free speech absolutism. I think that's something that Kyle and I can both agree on. Here. But Z-Pack is fighting the infectious sled stop cover up. There we go.
See?
That's the new Z-Pack. That's what that is. All right. So Kirkhoff fails a polygraph and is promoted to the CIA. That's a huge question mark. I'll let you comment on that.
It's also insane that she's able to hold on to that job. As I said, one of my buddies tried to go from FBI to go work for the CIA, and he wasn't allowed back in the SCIF. And as far as I know, he's not allowed to do anything sensitive until he retired. That's just how you don't get to fail a polygraph in the intelligence community and then just carry on like nothing happened. And you also usually don't see that person immediately go, oh, by the way, 5 days later, we found a better subject to be able to investigate. And by the way, he has nothing to do with government, and he has no connection to anything that anybody knew about this case previously. That's bizarre.
Yeah. I feel really bad for Brian Cole Jr.
I do too. His mom seems like a really nice lady. I've talked to her. They've got absolute killers for the defense team. So people should know that he's getting a really competent defense. And you got a couple of people in the journalist sphere, and my mouthpiece sharing the message as best I can. I'll continue to articulate the story. I think when people hear it, nobody listens to it and goes like, oh yeah, it's totally credible. The government's right. Unless you're a former FBI agent, we call them the former agents group. You guys can do the acronym yourself. The former agents group seems really, really interested in defending the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important to say, like, true justice is when the right person is held accountable and is convicted for it. And, this relates to the Charlie Kirk case as well. It's like, it's not a matter of we want any individual off. We just want the right person and whoever he was associated with to be found and convicted and held accountable. It's full and true justice for Charlie Kirk. And it's the same.
And expand it out. If there's other people involved, if there's nation state actors, they need to be identified. If there's
100%.
people that were involved in the chat that were just regular people, they should also be identified. Like,
yeah, we need to know the full truth. Yep,
let's just open it up and look at it. People can handle it.
Yep, I agree. Did anyone ever determine what Dan Bongino meant when he said you can't run a republic like this?
So he was talking about the quote unquote guardrails failing. And the guardrails are essentially that people who are sworn to do the right thing will do the right thing. This actually goes back to the Durham report. So we talked about Donald Trump and some of the investigations that went on. There were 2 investigations. One was the Mueller, the other one was the Durham. And the Durham report essentially came to the conclusion, I'll just summarize it for people, that there's no law, there's no policy, there's no litigious way that you could make the FBI do their job in a constitutional way. The only thing you can do is rely on FBI agents and employees to do the right thing because it's the right thing, which means you need people that are of good character to be in there. And what Dan apparently failed to realize is that you just said you can't run a republic like this. He was talking about the guardrails of somebody should have said, we don't do this to Donald Trump, to other people that were spied on, to any of the other sort of cases that I refer to as the playbook, setting people up for terrorism. Whitmer, there's a bunch of them, guys. Like, there's a whole book full of them called The Terror Factory. There's a right way to do law enforcement. It probably doesn't involve intelligence, by the way. You can't be an intelligence agency too. And instead, what Daniel did is he went in there, saw that, apparently had a moment, crashed out on X a few times, and either got told to be quiet. My guess is if someone told him like Donald Trump will just say that you're a piece of garbage and nobody will ever watch you again.
Yeah.
So he sold out. And so now he's a big cheerleader for the regime. He's a big cheerleader for government that the old Dan Bongino would have been calling out. Daniel Bongino, the former director, is 100% on board with whatever the government's narrative is. Feed him more slop. He loves it. He's the slop master.
So is that why you call him
Slop-agenda.
Daniel? Because that's his
I
new
call him
persona.
Daniel because Thomas Massey on X refers to him as Daniel every single time. And it's my favorite diminutive to call someone by their full name.
Yeah. It's like
when
what,
they go,
what your mom does.
it's super funny to me. Tom Massey calls him Daniel. And so my buddies and I all refer to him as Daniel now. And it's just, it's like, it's not even offensive, but it probably would get to him. Mm-hmm.
That's funny. All right. Can you stream podcasts with Barron to members only on Friday? Guys, that's not up to me. For all of you guys that know, I'm going on Barron Coleman's podcast tomorrow. It's a members only show. I don't have any ability to stream that from mine. Why was Nick Fuentes with the bullhorn untouched on January 6th?
Hell of a question. I don't have any specific. I don't know any specific information. I do know that he wasn't touched. So there's a couple of possibilities. Number one, they thought he was too big of a target and they were going to wait to get him later. That's a thing that they did with some people that were in the journalistic space or that had big followings. So they were building a steam head up to be able to go after the biggest people. Steve Baker was one of the last guys arrested for whatever it's worth, and he had a pretty good following. So that's one possible answer. But they went after Owen Schroyer, so that didn't stop them. I don't know how Owen was a little bit smaller fish than Steve. That seems like an opposite. The other possibility is that he was working as a federal source or that he cut some kind of a deal. Those are always a real possibility. What that would have looked like, I don't know. I don't know who he would have turned over. I don't have any special answers, but it's a real possibility that somebody's name is in a source room somewhere or they were operating on somebody's instruction and the agents that got it said no. And then the last possibility, which is like maybe the most innocuous, is that someone said, we're going to go after Nick Fuentes. They sent the case to the agent, someone like me. And I threw out something like 100 and maybe 200 J6 cases that came to me as leads. And I just said that these are First Amendment protected activities and there's no reason that anybody should be prosecuted. So I didn't continue that investigation. And if somebody had done that to Fuentes and nobody re-upped it, then there's a possibility that he escapes for that. So it's like three answers, none of which I can put any weight on.
Yeah. I don't know anything to chime in on that. I was about to ask about Kyle's lawsuit with the country music singing sensation.
Country music sensation. Kash Patel's partner in life, his friend who is a girl. Yeah. So they're not married, and so they don't have spousal privilege. I don't. She's been out there like diving into X conversations with me back and forth. She's so defamed, and she's lost so much of her capabilities that it's $5 million worth of damage that was done. I don't know what that means because she gets about 6,000 streams on Spotify per month. So you and I both know that nobody's making a living on that.
You ain't getting that money from that. That's for
she
sure.
had some vaporware where she created like a business to sell clothing. It was like American West Clothing or something, and it's on Instagram, and it has like 100 followers on it, and the website doesn't work to order clothing. So I don't know what this girl does for money, but it seems really weird that she wants to go out there and make allegations because in Texas you have to prove damages, so you have to show me how you lost $5 million.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just like it's the stupidest lawsuit. I'm really embarrassed for them, but I would make the argument for people that are curious. It's my contention, and I said this in the filings. My attorneys conveyed it. Kash Patel was very upset with me personally calling him out. I was embarrassing him on a national stage because I helped get Kash into that space. Kash Patel was a friendly, I thought. And after he felt like I had quote unquote betrayed him, by the way, he betrayed me first right away. Then they sued me because I was inconvenient for them. And it was a way to try to shut me up. It just turns out that I don't actually respond to threats like that. It just doesn't work on me. I'm not wired like that. So we just kept going.
I think most people, I mean, at least here, believe that Kash Patel was a good person going into that role, and we vouched for him and we advocated for him. And as one of my friends has said, we were hoodwinked. That's a shout out there to Coach Colin. We were hoodwinked, and I believe that is true.
Yeah.
All right, then we got a super chat there. It says nothing, but I appreciate the support. Anyone else followed the Facebook page for January 6th where they were posting warnings night before and the morning of that was set up and then disappeared? You know anything about that?
I don't, but January 6th always felt like a setup to me. It always felt like a trap. I told a couple of current FBI agents that it felt like a trap and they ended up not going and probably saved their careers. It never smelled right. I think a lot of people had that instinct. I couldn't attribute to anything other than the fact that I was, my intuition just said like, this is weird. everything was weird back then though, man. Like everything was freaking weird at the beginning, the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. And right after January 6th happened, they basically threw up, you saw this, but people who don't live in the DC area didn't. They threw up fences. They walled off
like that for a long time.
Yeah, it was like freaking Berlin in the 70s. It was crazy.
It was like that for a long time. I can attest to that firsthand. I go in there every now and then not every now and then, like multiple times a month for work. And that's you're exactly right on that.
It blew my mind. Like, it was one of the scarier things I've done. And I was driving around with a gun, because I was a federal agent at the time. And like I roll in there and it's like some unarmed National Guardsman is like checking my papers and some other crazy stuff. And you had to have I had badge access to Biden's inauguration, and I had to have it to get to work. And so I was driving into the field office and I'm like showing them my credentials, and they're like looking at all the stuff. And I still have the credentials. They're actually sitting over my desk over there. They have COVID warnings on them. Like, oh, like take your temperature and find out this stuff, and like wear a mask and like stay home and blah, blah. It was crazy, man. I mean, and that always looked like a trap to me for whatever it's worth. I don't know what they did, but,
well, and that's how the pipe bomber loops into all of it.
100%. Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I think it was a broader discussion to try to shut down dissent in this country from one side of the aisle.
Well, and that follows with regard to everything that was going on during COVID and that moment when
people were getting censored for speech.
Yeah.
My dad ran a radio show. My dad spent like 30 years in media and then retired, out of sports. And then he ended up going back and like running a small radio show in his little town in Arizona. And he got kicked off YouTube for talking about COVID at the time. And a lot of people did. And so, Donald Trump got kicked off all these platforms. So as your previous commenter said, Donald Trump was the guy that we thought we outsourced the revolution because he understood what it meant to be canceled, to be physically attacked, to be investigated by the FBI, to have them kick down the door and go search his house. Like all of those things that went wrong made him the perfect vehicle to go de-weaponize government. And instead of what we've seen is like a lot more of the same. And I think a lot of people that are disappointed with that don't put on the MAGA hat, it's just because you're a discerning person that says, I was promised one thing, it didn't happen. So I'm open to like changing my mind.
Yeah. Amen. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well said. Enjoy your lives, Zax. We really are high IQ audience. LOL. We are truth seekers. Christ is king. Amen.
Amen.
Agreed. Truth firster, dual meaning, truth regardless of outcome. And John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me, who is Christ. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. I mean, I think we spoke about that with regard to putting the truth first, regardless of outcome. And that is something that Kyle himself has lived out. So I think that term white martyrdom that you brought up was extremely powerful. And that's something that we are all called to every single day. But Kyle, thanks for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. I thought this was a great conversation. Any last words? Let everybody know where to find you. I did put your YouTube channel here in the show notes so people can go and follow you. But I'll let you close us out here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You guys can follow me at Kyle Seraphin on YouTube. You can follow me at Kyle Seraphin over on X, Seraphin, easily spelled. I think I'm pretty well shadow banned over there. I'm also on Truth, but I don't ever use it anymore. And I'm on Rumble as well. So it's rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. We go live at 9:30 Eastern time in the mornings. We talk about things. I try to cut through the nonsense. I try to be fair-minded about the stuff that I see. I'm just one guy solo producing, same as you. I have the same kind of experience. Just trying to be a good dad and a decent husband and a gun shooter. I got a lot of guns. If I had a choice, I would talk about guns and gear, and I don't care about politics even a little bit. That's what I would do, and I would run the security program for my church. But other than that, like I have to talk about politics because that's what's going to come for all of our other core fundamental freedoms. So I'll just tell people, you all got a look at what it looked like, and all of you know what you did when it happened in 2020 and in 2021. They came for other people's jobs. Maybe they came for your jobs. You experienced some sort of loss. You got another second chance at it. Make sure you figured out what that red line is. My red line is not the same as Zach's, not the same as yours. I'm not here to judge what that is, but figure out where your feet need to be planted when they come to hit you. Because when they do, you want to make sure you've already made up your mind. You won't make it up the right way in that moment.
Yep. Amen. Great advice. All right, Kyle. Thanks again, man. Talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.